Hello, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Apostate Aladdin. Today's topic is important, and it's important because it hasn't been discussed enough, in my opinion, at least not with any definitive, I don't know, definitive accuracy. And it's especially important given how violence against women is being increasingly reported, which is a good thing. The reporting is increasing, but it's also occurring a lot. It's bringing attention to the fact that it's occurring every single day, and it's gotten to a point where I'm not sure if you've heard. There's been a very graphic video going around the internet lately about violence. Well, not violence, the murder of a 17-year-old woman in Iran. And I won't talk too much about that right now, but I just want to emphasize the importance of the topic today and the seriousness of it. And with that comes a trigger warning, I suppose. I'm not going to show anything violent or graphic on screen, but it is important to keep in mind that some of these issues might distress you, especially if you're a woman who has had some experience with this or not. So I just wanted to make that clear. So, a few days ago, I had a live stream about the verse 434, Surah An-Nisa, verse 34. And the topic of the stream was correct me. So I posed my interpretation, which isn't really mine, but the majority interpretation of that verse. And I wanted people to come on the live stream and tell me why they think differently. And I had a back and forth with a few people, and one of them had suggested that I listen to Dr. Jonathan Brown. And I have heard about this man before. If you don't know, he's a convert to Islam who has some sort of degree in Islamic studies, and he's been preaching Islam for a while now. And I heard his name a lot, and people keep saying, you should listen to what he has to say about slavery or about violence against women and things like that. And I wanted to give it a fair shot. So after the last stream, I actually listened to that video that I was linked immediately. It was a 7-minute video, and that's the one that I'm going to begin with today. And just sitting through that video, I was scratching my head at how I was supposed to find answers there. Okay, so I'm going to tell you how this stream is going to be structured today. I'm going to start with an introduction with some clarifications and disclaimers about what this is and why I'm doing this. I'm going to pose one real-world issue, not the murder that I was talking about earlier, but an even wider scale issue. I'm going to show you the videos and the supporting or negating hadiths as I talk about the videos. At the end, I'm going to show you some more hadiths that are relevant, and I'll show you an interesting admission by Jonathan that just baffles me, to be honest. If time permits, there might be some Q&A. I might take some comments here and there. I'll try to. If you send a comment, I will bookmark it if I can get to it, so don't worry. I might still get to it. So, to begin, why am I doing this? Do I want women to be beaten? Do I want Muslims to take the violent interpretation of these verses and hadiths? No, that is not what I'm here for. The reason why I'm doing this is because often we hear apologetics pretending that all of these issues that stem from this precedent aren't actually stemming from this precedent. So all we're getting out of these apologetics is PR for Islam. This is not real Islam. That's not a real Muslim. The reason why there's a lot of violence in a lot of Muslim communities is because of culture, because of outside factors, and we just leave it at that. No one ever fixes anything, and no one puts in as much effort as they do into apologetics or refuting Islamophobes, as they would put it, as they should be putting effort into actually changing the sources that actually give these bad interpretations, as they would call them, bad interpretations. So I want them to focus their attention elsewhere, and I want to present a case that it's not my opinion, it's the majority interpretation of these scholars that people keep ignoring. So this is why I'm doing this. And one important reason this has to be highlighted is, aside from the fact that it sets precedent and empowers abusers, if people start believing apologists, against their own judgment, against their own ability to understand Arabic or whatever language it is they're receiving it in, if they see the evidence right in front of their eyes that says this verse is violent, but then the apologist says it isn't, and they take that, they lose trust in their skepticism going forward. They don't trust themselves anymore. They don't trust their understanding of the language anymore, because they're always told you're misunderstanding even though it's right there in your face. So then they become drones, سمعنا وأطعنا, and that could go in either way. Whatever they get from whatever sheikh, whatever apologist, that's what they're running with. And that's a problem. I want people to think critically about their beliefs, whatever those beliefs may be. So I urge you, rather than dismissing any of the sources that I bring because, you see that one of them is from a website that has ties to a Saudi sheikh or something, before you say that's a Saudi sheikh, it doesn't represent Islam, I urge you to dig deeper. Look at the source of that, the hadith that they quote, because their opinions aren't coming from thin air, and I'm not even digging deep to find the sources that I'll show you today. Unfortunately, that's the first page of Google is full of those. And it's not like I just found those and ran with them. I was looking for the apologetic points, from actual reputable sources, and I couldn't find any. All I was finding was websites like Yaqeen Institute just, putting out a bunch of nonsense without actually backing it up with anything. So just know that I tried to be as, what's the word for it, as unbiased as I could be. And this is coming from my research back as a Muslim as well. So, yeah, one more thing. If you do think that it's not real Islam, your first concern should be, what about the people who do think that this is real Islam? What about the women who are harmed because of this misunderstanding? That's what your focus should be on. If you just jump from, listening to me to going, this is not real Islam, and leave it at that, you're forgetting the victims. So whether or not it is real Islam, I urge you to focus on the victims. What is the last thing I wanted to say here? Yes, and when it comes to dawah people or preachers or apologists, part of what they're doing is inviting people into Islam. So this is why I'm very harsh on them. This is why I take apart their every word. It's because they're selling you a product, except it's for the rest of your life. They should tell you exactly what's in it, because by the time that someone converts or commits more to Islam or whatever it may be, down the line, they may have invested way too much emotionally, personally, in their life to be able to get out of it or to be able to see it any other way, and it's going to cause them harm. So this is to get them to be honest about what they're advertising. All right. And if I do make any jokes, I'm really trying not to, but it's going to be to diffuse the tension that I'm feeling inside. So to begin with, in the beginning of my journey as Aladdin, when I was first new on Twitter, I would post some hadiths and talk about them. And someone tagged Jonathan Brown's Twitter account, and they were telling me this guy has all, the refutations and so on. And Jonathan Brown blocked me. I put that in the thumbnail, but yeah, right now I had deactivated Twitter, so I can't show you again. But he blocked me when I had basically no following. So I find that interesting. I don't think he was threatened or anything. He was probably thinking, what a nuisance. I don't want to ever have to deal with that. Well, guess what, John? Here we are. Can I call you John? Well, I guess you're not here, so I'm going to call you John. Another disclaimer, I'm playing the videos at 10% faster, just, to get through them a little faster. So let's begin with the first one. The first one is about verse 434.
That's how we interact with each other in language. But when you have a text like the Quran, that is
the audio okay, everybody? Is it matching my volume?
Always read through the Sunnah of the Prophet.
Let's listen again.
That's how we interact with each other in language. But when you have a text like the Quran, that is always read through the Sunnah of the Prophet, you have to look at what the Sunnah of the Prophet is telling you to understand the intended meaning of the text. And in that case...
So let's begin here. So if you have a text like the Quran, and to interpret it, you have to look at the Sunnah of the Prophet to understand the intended meaning of the words, meaning that the author isn't good at expressing the words, or they're not good at literature. If I give you a book and I say you have to read the commentary that was not recorded for hundreds of years and didn't reach all the same parts of the world as the Quran and aren't written by me to begin with, that's a bad book. So from the get-go, we're talking about, he's saying you have to interpret the Quran. You don't know what the Quran means. You don't know what the words mean. You have to know the intended meaning through the life of the Prophet. But let's just, let's give in to that. Let's listen.
The intended meaning of God's words is not necessarily the one that's closest to the evident meaning. It is the one that is best supported by the evidence.
The intended meaning of God's words is not necessarily the closest one to the obvious meaning. Is God bad at words?
Of the other verses of the Quran, of the Sunnah of the Prophet, of our understanding of the overall teachings of Islam, this is what tells us the intended meaning of the Quran.
So I understand that context is important, and I will definitely comment on. I'll let him, give the context before I comment on it. But I just want to highlight how he's simply saying the obvious meaning is not the actual meaning. So again, I want to highlight the author's deficiency here. You should have the obvious meaning of a text be the meaning, especially when it comes to something so important. Let's get back to it.
And so when we read that verse that I mentioned, the verse 434, the quote-unquote wife-beating verse, when you read that, you don't read it through what comes to your mind first. You read it what comes to your mind after you understand the Sunnah of the Prophet. And the Sunnah of the Prophet on this issue is very clear. What does Aisha say in Sahih Hadiths? She says, the Prophet, مَا ضَرَبَ أَحَدًا قَطْ. The Prophet never struck anybody بِيَدِهِ.
Okay, we're going to start there. Actually, before we start there, I want to show you why this is important. So here is a quote from Sheikh Al-Azhar that has been making the rounds lately. This is Sheikh Al-Azhar. He's Al-Azhar in Egypt is a very important religious institution that not only Egyptians follow, but a lot of other Muslims in a lot of other countries. It's an authority on Islam in many ways. Obviously, people are going to say there's no authority on Islam. There's no one big organization, but this is one of the biggest organizations. And here's what he says in English. Beating the wife is not obligatory or sunnah, but it is allowed to confront the disobedient wife and nashes. That's the word for nushuz that some apologists try to switch. And break her pride in order to preserve the family values meaning, and from going astray and breaking apart the family. Besides, this topic has regulations and conditions, and this allowance can be avoided if using it will cause harm. I want to highlight this part, which is basically a soft backpedaling. This can be avoided if it causes harm. When does beating your wife to any degree not cause harm? That's just a cop-out by saying, well, Allah says, or I say, don't do it if it's harmful. So in the cases where it does cause harm, you can wash Islam's hands of this blood, So let's get to the first video here. So Jonathan was saying that Aisha said, Muhammad lam yadrib ahadan qat. And I have the hadith here. I'm going to have all the sources in the descriptions. There's plenty of links today. It's going to be, a whole book. And let's look at that for a second. Lam yadrib. Let's go back.
Never struck anybody with his hand. In Sahih Hadiths, she says, the Prophet, مَا ضَرَبَ أَحَدًا قَطْ. The Prophet never struck any.
مَا ضَرَبَ أَحَدًا قَطْ. You hear ضَرَبَ? Right? That's the word that everybody keeps saying means separate. So here is daraba is synonymous with lakaza, right? According to Al-Qurtubi. And again, the sources are going to be in the description. Al-Qurtubi says when he was explaining this verse, الضرب في هذه الآية هو ضرب الأدب الغير مبرح. Non-excruciating to discipline. It doesn't break a bone, and it's like a push, a lakza. It's like a push or something similar. So now we understand daraba and lakaza are synonymous. And then al-lahda is synonymous with lakaza. So there are many explanations of that. And that's the hadith where Muhammad pushes Aisha on the chest, or, pushes her on the chest, so they say. And she says, and it hurt me. She uses the word lahada. And the explanations, like Nawawi here says, it's like a lakza or wakza. Like a poke or a push. So now we've established that these words are synonymous. Here's another explanation. It says al-lahd or al-laks. They're synonymous. So when Aisha was pushed or, hit or stricken on the chest, and she said it hurt me. That is synonymous with beating. But then she has a hadith where she says he never hit anybody. And here's what I want to point out. When there are two contradictory hadiths or anything contradictory in Islam, it's just as valid to take one as the other. I mean, obviously you can point to other precedents and then make a case for one side more than the other, but somehow Muslims manage to keep everything within the system of Islam, or apologists, let me say, without dismissing either of them as completely false. So is it really a stretch to think that this girl who was groomed into this marriage from a young age was convinced by Muhammad that, no, I didn't beat you. This was all to teach you. This pain wasn't actually a beating. And then she goes and she says he never beat anybody. That's just one thing. But I want to point out that this whole tangent that he took us on, I forgot to point that out, is a tangent that's irrelevant to the verse. Because he's saying Muhammad never beat anybody, therefore the verse doesn't mean to beat, or something like that. Let's hear him out.
He never struck anybody with his hand, except not a man, not a woman, not a servant, except in the path of jihad. Never struck anybody. And when this verse is revealed that I read to you about adribuhunna, the context in which it's revealed, according to Hadith and Sunan Tirmidhi and other books, is that a woman comes to the Prophet and complains about her husband striking her. And the Prophet says, La tadribu ima Allah, do not strike the female servants of God.
Okay.
And then Omar comes to the Prophet, depending on the version of the Hadith, comes to the Prophet and says,
depending on the version of the Hadith, I want to remind you of how casually these are dismissed. So a Hadith would have multiple versions, all of them sahih, all of them verified as correct from different sources, and they would have variations in the words, and variations that do make a difference in the meaning. Or sometimes they don't make a huge difference, sometimes they do, but somehow we just accept that the method is accurate, but at the same time it returns multiple variants. How is that the case? I don't know, but that's not relevant at the moment.
The women in Medina are not, they're very, they're kind of
they're what?
Overcoming their husbands.
Overcoming their husbands is what he's going to say. All right, let's switch to the actual hadith. So this hadith is more damning. I don't know why he would bring it up. So here's the hadith. Let me see. So do not beat Allah's handmaidens. So la tadribu ima Allah. That's what he quoted. But, so Muhammad said that. And then when Umar came to the messenger and said, women have become emboldened towards their husbands. What's the word that this apologist used?
They're very forceful in their. The women in Medina are not. They're very.
Stutter.
They're kind of overcoming their husbands.
Overcoming their husbands?
They're very forceful in their personalities. They're not
forcing their personalities.
Like the women in Mecca.
They're not like the women in Mecca. What does any of that mean? So let's go back to it. Emboldened towards their husbands because they're not being beaten anymore, because Muhammad said don't beat God's servants or whatever. All right, so women have become emboldened towards their husbands. He, the Prophet, gave permission to beat them with that verse. So you see the sequence here? You see the sequence? This apologist is saying Muhammad preached not to beat the wives or the women, but then Umar complained that the men are complaining. So then the verse was revealed, as if Allah suddenly remembered to reveal the verse. So this first quote doesn't absolve Muhammad of anything. If anything, it shows how spineless he was to go back on his word and Allah to go back on his word and reveal this verse. Let's continue the hadith. Then many women came round to the family of the messenger, complaining against their husbands. So the messenger said, many women have gone round Muhammad's family complaining against their husbands. They are not the best among you. Oh, thank you, Muhammad. How strong and what a defender of women. What a white knight in shining armor. What is this? Those are not the best among you. You just gave them license to beat their wives, and then you say, but that's not great, though. Let's go back to it.
And so then then this verse is revealed and talks about how that if your wife is having nushuz, first you admonish her. If she does not desist, then you cease.
He doesn't explain what nushuz is.
Sleeping with her, she still continues, then the verse says you strike her.
It does say strike because, as somebody had pointed out in the last call, they were under the impression, because they don't speak Arabic, this Muslim was under the impression that the word means strike as in like one tap, like one thing. It just says idrubuhunna, which means beat them. That could be multiple, but let's get back to it.
But what does the Prophet say about this? He said, أولئك ليس أولئك خياركم. Those people who strike their wives are not the best of you. In another version of the hadith in the Mustadrak of al-Hakim and Naysaburi, he says, خياركم لن تضربوا. The best of you will not strike your wife.
So, because I keep hearing this part of the hadith as an apologetic point, Muhammad is such a defender of women that he said the best of you won't beat women. Is that really a condemnation? I mean, the people who aren't the best of them, they could still go to heaven, right? If you're a Muslim and you're not the best, but you're doing all right, and you beat your wife, it's halal. So how does Muhammad's soft condemnation of if you want to be the best, don't beat your wife, how does it negate God's verse, allegedly God's verse, saying you could beat your wife?
And in Sahih Bukhari, the Prophet says, alayhi salatu لا يجلد أحدكم امرأة.
Before we get to that, let me show you some of the explanations of this verse. So here's this explanation. So I highlighted some words, and this took me hours to do this digging. This beating, they're explaining, it's to instruct and teach the woman, right? And it should be the last resort, as they say. And here's the verse. And here it's citing this hadith that we're going to talk about later in this video, that they were created from a rib, a crooked rib. We're going to talk about that hadith later on. So here it says it's a duty on the husband to be patient and kind and all that, and not to rush to beat them, right? You start by giving them advice and pointing them, and let's just focus on this for a second. The infantilizing language that is used here. We don't hear about the man being given advice and taught what he's doing wrong and so on. This is basically giving license to men to direct their wives however they want, within whatever Islamic limits they want to pretend are fair. Why is she the child who needs to be directed? Oh, right, that's because she is married a child in some cases, unfortunately. And there's a very damning photo that I'm going to show you later. So let's get that out of the way. To pretend that whether it was a violent beating or not a violent beating, to teach your wife something is infantilizing to begin with. And here it says, beat them in non-excruciating pain, and non-excruciating beating, and we're gonna talk about that. Because if the man is if he has low patience, if he's bad-mannered, things get worse. Sa'at al-ahwal. Matters get worse. And if the beating was happening for every reason or another, not reserved for special occasions, then things are going to get worse. Sa'at al-ahwal. Wow, how what a deterrent that is. And then it says here, the husband has to be patient and well-mannered, and don't beat except if it's absolutely necessary. And then it will be a light, non-excruciating beating. And we're gonna talk about that. So here's another explanation. This is about the hadith that we're just talking about. So when Muhammad said, don't beat the women, and they stopped, this explanation says because the Sahaba, radiallahu anhum, were of first class, like the first generation. They're the favorite generation. They're such great men that they just stopped beating their women. They listened and they stopped beating their women. They can't go 2 sentences without praising these men who just in the next part of the hadith, when he allowed the beating, the women started being beaten a lot more and they started complaining. So which is it? Were they the best men ever, or were they angry Arab desert men who would beat their wives? I don't understand. And then it says here, النساء قاصرات عقل وناقصات دين. Women are lacking in intelligence and in religion, in faith. And then it says, when the Prophet said, don't beat them, they became emboldened. This is exactly what I was talking about. وتعالينا فأفرط الرجال. So the men overbeat them. So the men, there was a good amount of beating, but the men overdid it. If you want more reading, I'm putting the sources in the description. And then they went to complain to the Prophet. And then the Prophet said, don't overbeat them. But if there's a reason to beat them, then la ba's, then there's no issue. And I think the analogy here is giving every man on earth, every married man, a gun and saying, hey, don't use it except if it's necessary. And if they get angry and they use it, you say, well, I told them not to use it unless it's necessary. Have you ever seen a man playing Xbox? Have you seen, or PlayStation or whatever, have you seen how angry they get? Call of Duty, FIFA, whatever the hell game. Have you seen how violent men get? Have you seen how they start wars? And how mighty irresponsible of this God to give this license to lightly or otherwise beat the women and then just wash his hands and the religion's hands from all the blood when the men overuse it, according to how Muslims put it. It baffles me. And here's an explanation. Again, links are going to be in the description. وَلَا يَضْرِبُنَّ ضَرْبًا شَدِيدًا يُؤَدِّي إِلَى Here it says, don't beat them a beating so hard that they complain. That they complain. And the explanation of this non-excruciating beating is don't hit the face, don't break a bone, don't, and I'll show you the source in a little bit. It's that kind of thing. And it's saying to the, like, just not to the point that they complain. So you can abuse them. And if there's this culture of abuse that's normalized, that your husband can do that and it's nobody's business except in the family, you can't complain. They will complain once it gets like really, really, really bad. But up until that point, it's all right. I noticed a comment here, and I'm just going to pin it. I'm not going to acknowledge it for a second because I feel like you're truly not looking at the sources that I'm bringing. All right, let's go back to the hadith that Jonathan here is going to quote.
Prophet says, alayhi salam, لا يجلد أحدكم امرأته جلد العبد ثم يجامعها آخر النهار أو آخر اليوم. Let none of you strike his wife like he'd strike a slave and then go and sleep with her at the end of the day. And in his final sermon,
before we get to that, let's look at this hadith. Muhammad said, he made mention of women and said, some of you beat your wives as if they were slaves and then lie with them at the end of the day. And there's other versions where he says, don't do that. What I want to highlight here, and funny thing is, it's weird how these hadiths are compiled in the same hadith, in multiple versions of it. And then he admonished them against laughing at others passing winds. He said, like, why are you laughing at farts? I don't understand the relevance of that, but it is there. So here's what I want to point out. In no explanation, not even Jonathan here, points out that the Muhammad said, don't beat slaves. It was just an accepted fact. Don't beat them like you'd beat a slave. And in some explanations, like I'll show here, they give other examples. Muhammad could have used that moment to say, don't beat slaves, don't beat women. None of that. He said, don't beat them like you beat a slave. So the very obvious meaning here is slaves you can beat slaves very hard, and there's no hard condemnation here. Don't beat the wife that hard. I'm out of words. And here it is in Arabic. كما يضرب العبد, like a slave is beaten. It doesn't say like a slave was beaten, but he was condemned, or a slave shouldn't be beaten. Don't beat her like a slave is beaten. That is reserved for slaves. And in other versions, ضرب الفحل, الفحل هو البعير. So in some definitions, that's like a horse. In some definitions, that's a camel. The way that people beat camels to make them go. So Muhammad is just saying, don't beat them that hard. And what irks me here, I keep seeing repetitive gaslighting attempts in all of these explanations. Every single one of them says that Muhammad or Allah or whatever preaches good khuluq, patience and kindness between the married couple, and so on and so forth. وَجَعَلَ بَيْنَكُمْ مَوَدَّةً وَرَحْمَةً. This is a verse. And then at the same time, they say beat her lightly or whatever, not lightly, just not as hard as a slave. How do you reconcile these two things? Well, the answer is in that culture, in that backwards culture, backwards compared to how we are today, it was normalized that there was a level of beating that was accepted, I suppose. And you can still have what the author would think is mawadda and rahma, mercy and compatibility and compassion and all that. You could still have that with a little bit of beating. And it could have been the case that women saw no other way. So, yeah. And here it says in al-mu'ashara tazidu min al-mawadda. So that could mean either intercourse or, relations. إذا طال الانفصال بين الزوجين أو الهجر, if the separation between the couple or abandonment, becomes long, or if the woman is keeping herself away from her husband or busy because she's employed or something like that, the man's manners get worse. This is in this explanation on a website, Khalid al-Sabt. I think that's a Kuwaiti sheikh. And again, I urge you to think. Don't just think this man is wearing shimar or whatever it is that people in the Gulf wear. Therefore, he's in a different part of the world. Therefore, this is not real Islam. Think about how this is the norm in the Middle East. Like no one protests, like people try to protest, but this is normal and it's always been normal. Think about how women actually suffer because of these. Like a man would look up, how do I solve my marital issues? And then they look up this and they say, well, Muhammad said, beat them, but not as hard as a slave. And then they see all this victim blaming. And then this person, we have a Muslim, a very annoying person here saying, no one in their right mind hits a woman now. Go tell that to all the men in the Middle East right now and outside the Middle East as well. You're bothering me. All right, so then he's going to talk about the final sermon. Like, is there anything that Jonathan said that I'm misrepresenting here so far?
His final khutbah at Hajj, what is one of the things the Prophet says? He says, "Attaqullah fi nisaikum." Fear God as concerns your wives, because you have taken them as a trust from God. They're in your trust. And he says, only if they do commit what he says is a fahisha mubayyana, an egregious, inappropriate behavior, egregious.
But the verse says, "Allati takhafuna nushuzahunna," those who you fear their disobedience. And the fact that they're dragging me into these pointless arguments about how much did the woman overstep her boundaries is a problem. The fact that I have to start nitpicking, but the Quran actually, like the bar is way lower in the Quran. Why are we talking about that bar at all? They always frame it like this evil woman who's doing everything to hurt her man and hurt her family deserves a light beating. They're bringing the extremes close together. No, the bar is very low. If you fear her disobedience, and it's left vague up to interpretation of the sheikh, of the person, whatever. If you fear her disobedience, then you beat her. And here he's saying, if she does an egregious act, what a lie this is. And we'll look at the hadith in a minute.
Fahisha. Then strike them, but what? Only strike them darb ghayr mubarrih, in a way that leaves no mark, that causes no harm.
Let me remind you of, so those are two different things. Leaves no mark, causes no harm are not equivalent in any way. In any way. So how many times have you been in a fight as a child and you just didn't have marks? Like you guys slapped each other up and no long-term marks. Does that mean it's fine? Does that mean that there was no harm caused? Does that mean it's not humiliating? So when they say non-excruciating beating or غير مبرح, listen to what that means. Let's concede, even though Allah didn't have the presence of mind to write it in the verse ضربا غير مبرح, let's concede that that's what Allah meant and we have to figure it out elsewhere. What does that entail? And all the definitions say don't break a bone, don't hit the face. That's how low the bar is.
So that's the sunnah of the Prophet.
What a great sunnah.
That through which we read this verse, and through which every Islamic school of thought would read this verse.
That is a lie, but okay.
Which is why in the various schools of law, and you now, a lot of you are.
Let's talk about the final sermon first before we get to that. So here's part of that final sermon. وَاسْتَحْلَلْتُمْ فُرُوجَهُنَّ. What it says is their private parts, their vaginas are halal to you as their husbands, right? That the fact that it's kind of like their property. You have the right to intercourse with them, the right to intercourse with them. They must not bring into your house anyone whom you dislike. And let me remind people, this doesn't mean they shouldn't bring a strange man into the house. I mean, yeah, that's part of it. But as I will show later, it means anyone he doesn't like, including, some madhabs think, including her mom and her dad. But the majority interpretation for anything else is, even if it's her husband, her sister or her brother, if he says no, don't bring them in. And if you bring him in, he should beat you. I will show that again later. And yeah, here. And if they do beat them, but not severely, beat your wife, but not severely. That's what this apologist is saying so far. And this is an article from a website called mawdu'a.com. And I just wanted to show you some of what it was said here. So this section is called Huquq an-Nisa, the rights of women. It starts with it, the rights of women in Hadith. And then it says the women's rights and her duties. Oh, so we went from rights to duties before even talking about what the rights are. To preserve her husband's house. So she doesn't let any human, even if it was one of her family or mahram like her brother, her nephew, I guess her nephew, anything like that, like someone she cannot marry, someone who there cannot be any sexual relations between them in any world. He can tell her not to bring any of those people in. It's her right. Look at how this is phrased. It's her right in return to preserving the house, that her husband would allow her, would permit her to have her parents visit. You see the language that these people use, the way that they twist the words. They always say al-mar'a mukarrama fil Islam, that the woman is I don't know what the word is right now, but the woman is, her place is preserved in Islam. She's her value is preserved, all that stuff. And then they twist the words like that. Her right is that the husband would let her have her parents over if she preserves the house in the other way. And if that doesn't work, then beat her in a way that, disciplining way. Again, infantilizing as hell. And then it says, and from her rights, let's see. And the woman's rights, right? And it starts, it's talking about how Muhammad's talking to the man, saying, you come to your field, you plow it however you want. That's the beginning of talking about women's rights again. And feed her if you ate, and cover her if you're covering, like in clothes, and don't beat the face. So her right is that their husband would provide for her the basic ass necessities and not beat her face. And her rights begin with him having his right to have her in whatever way he wants. Is my commentary even necessary? I don't believe that. I can't believe that all I'm doing today is literally reading. Is it that difficult for people to think about this? Is it the difficulty in accessing this information? I don't know. Here's an explanation again from the same article about what is this non-excruciating beating. Don't split the head. Don't break a bone. And again, it is for, I keep seeing these words repeated, it is for disciplining, it's for teaching. And her rights are, food, drink, clothing. And this is important. I'm going to talk about this later on. If she forfeits some of her rights without pressure, then that's fine. I'll give you an example of how she can forfeit her rights and how no pressure. I want to comment on this for a second. So in this article, again, sources are going to be in the description. There was this, I clicked on a link in it to explain why did the Prophet command us to take care of our women. And this was the image on that article. This is the image. I didn't put this in there. This is the image that was on that article. لماذا أوصى الرسول بالنساء? Not the girls, the women. And in the context of what we were just talking about, it's the women, it's not the girls. Why is it a little girl in a hijab looking up to a man in this infantilizing position? Not to mention the fact that I don't know if she's 6 years old, then that's halal according to Muhammad. It boils my blood. Just preparing for this stream took a toll on me. And if someone wants to come out here and say this website is not Islam, this website is not from Allah, fine. But where did this mentality come from? How is it so prevalent? And why does nobody care? Why is it that people only care when they leave Islam? Why is it that people only care when they want to defend Islam? Is it because they don't want to confront the ugliness of this? Is it because they genuinely believe? I don't think Muslims are bad people. That's what I want to repeat here. Muslims are not bad people. They don't want to be beating their wives. But they genuinely believe this stuff because of everything else, all the other pressure tactics in religion. Or if they don't believe this, if they fall for the apologetics, then they want to believe that Islam is not this ugly. Again, continuing that, well, I guess I put in the wrong screenshot. So you're going to miss out on a little bit, but that's fine. This is also going to be in the comments. Let's go back to Jonathan.
Here, you know how complicated fiqh is. You know how many, which is why in the various schools of law, and you now, a lot of you are students here, you know how complicated fiqh is. You know how many different opinions, like for example, in the Hanafi madhab, you can have, you know, Zahir Riwaya, and you have the opinion of Imam Abi Hanifa, you have the opinion of Abu Yusuf, you have the opinion of Muhammad bin Hassan Shibani, you have the opinion of Zufar bin Hudayl, of all these opinions. So fiqh is very complicated. But across the different madhabs, there's the same theme over and over again. You can only strike your wife lightly, in a way that causes no harm.
Yeah, we've talking about what that means.
If you cause her harm, you're liable for the diya. You're liable for compensating her for injuries. And according to every school except the Hanafi school, a judge, if a wife goes to a judge and says, my husband's beating me, and there's...
Before we go further, I will comment on that. But the way that he says every madhab, every school of thought, except the Hanafi school, and he just moves on. Tell us what's in the Hanafi school. Is there a non-zero number of people following the Hanafi school? Do the women who are under that, subjugated to that law, don't matter? Why is it that as long as the majority is, according to him, the majority is fine, which fine with a huge asterisk, then forget about that one madhab? Are those people who follow that madhab going to hell because they misunderstood Islam? If not, then who's going to pay for all of these this harm? Well, someone could say, well, those women are going to get compensated extra in heaven, but does that even matter once you've gotten everything you want in heaven? And what about those people who aren't going to go to heaven? That's all presuming that this paradigm exists. What about the people who are harmed and are not going to go into heaven? It's such a bizarre system. But let's see what he has to say about this.
Witnesses or evidence that the husband's beating her, or the husband confesses, the judge can do what's called tafriq. He can end the marriage legally, and the wife will get to keep her mahr, and the husband has to pay her nafaqah until her iddah ends, and the marriage is over. And this is what...
So that's the huge flex here, is that in 3 of the 4 madhabs, if the woman is beaten and the husband confesses to it, or if it leaves a mark, there's a lot of factors here. And if the judge rules in her favor, he will separate them. How merciful.
I found very interesting in my research that if you look at Sharia court information about Sharia courts, whether it's in Iran in the 900s, or Andalusia in the 900s, or Syria in the 1300s, or Janneh in Mali in the 1900s, or Zanzibar in the 1900s, or Yemen in the mid-20th century, or Egypt in the 1920s, you always see the same thing. Husband or wife goes to the court, says, my husband's beating me. If there's evidence that he's beating her, like physically.
How could there be evidence if she's locked in the house, for example? Like, what if he locks her in till the bruises are gone? What if there's no bruises? Are you not listening to yourself, man?
If there's witnesses, if the husband confesses.
If the husband confesses, wow, we're hinging on the morality of a man who's beating his wife.
judge would end the marriage. If the woman wants, he'll end the marriage. She keeps her dowry. She gets maintenance.
If the woman wants, I don't know if he realizes how damning that is. So a woman who's subjected to her husband's mercy, who is under his mercy because he pays for everything. And that's literally emphasized in the verse 434. It says you have rights over them. You are dominant over them. You're caretakers over them because of what you spent on them. So the woman is infantilized. She doesn't have a source of income. And now if she wants to separate from him after he beat her, that's unfortunately a real question, because what is she going to do without him? So now the abused woman might have to stay, because even with the judge being there and everything, what is she going to do without her husband? And the way that society looks down on divorced women. He doesn't realize the issues that he's just skirting over.
And the husband, if there's injury, has to pay to compensate the injury. And this is, for example, in the Hanafi realm of Palestine in the 17th century. There's one case where a woman has some of her teeth knocked out by her husband, and the judge says, you have to pay your wife 3 gold coins because this is the diya for teeth.
Okay, let's talk about that for a second. So I wasn't able to dig out this case from the 1700s. I'm not saying it doesn't exist. It could be in something that wasn't digitized or whatever. Here's what I found interesting. So in this case, the husband beat her to the point that her teeth fell out, and he gave her 3 gold coins because that's how Islam values it. And he doesn't say, was the husband jailed? Was the husband beaten for that beating? Were they separated? None of that is mentioned in his example right here, but I'd like to know, does the husband face any consequences aside from monetary consequences? So rich man, does he just keep spending money every time he beats one of his wives? Is that how you value women? By how much money it costs for a tooth? What happens after that? Like she can't put back her teeth. I mean, today we might have that option for fake teeth or something like that, but the fact that we're even discussing any of this, it's insane. The examples that he thinks are saving face for Islam. And what I don't understand is how all the comments, for the majority of the comments, are just like, MashaAllah, Shaykh, you're such an amazing speaker. This cleared my doubts. Or the haters of Islam now have nothing to say. Where are the critical thinkers? They're scared. They're scared to comment because of what people do to them.
So it's very interesting because in the tradition of American law and British law, it's only in the very late 19th century or in the 20th century that a husband can ever have to pay any money to his wife. Before then, married women aren't allowed to own property.
So their whole shtick here is money, right? Women are entitled to some money. Like they always say in Islam, a woman's right is her own money. But what is her own money in this kind of system? She's not really allowed to work, right? Or in most cases, she wouldn't be allowed to work. In today's world, it's different because the family needs the double income. But if they didn't, the woman would have no income. She only gets the money that her husband gives her for the house, or maybe some for her. And he doesn't get to touch her money. But what money? She gets the mahr that they hold against her. If she wants a divorce, she has to give it back unless there's a good reason, like she gets the hell beaten out of her all the time. What is he trying to justify her by saying that other countries haven't caught up to this progress till not that long ago, according to him? And now we're way past that. So what is with this whataboutism?
And there's something called in law tort immunity, where the husband's actually immune from any case that his wife brings against him that he harmed her. It's impossible for him to be liable financially to her. But in the Islamic tradition, since the very beginning, since the life of the Prophet, part of the Sharia was that just because you're married to somebody doesn't mean that if you injure them, you don't have to pay for it. You can't be held accountable before the law. You're always held accountable. In the Sharia, if you harm anybody, you're held accountable. Doesn't matter if they're your wife or your husband.
So that last part, if you harm anybody, you're held accountable, took me on a little bit of a tangent that I won't take you on right now. But I found out that the diya, the compensation that you pay for killing someone in Islam for a non-Muslim under Muslim rule is half of that of a Muslim. And if they don't pay their jizya, their extortion tax, then there's nothing there to be paid. Yeah, it's such a backward system that's so behind the times that all he can think about is money. They paid money for her teeth. He doesn't say what justice was paid. How did the husband suffer? Did the husband go to jail? Did the husband have to? I don't know. In the barbaric system that is pretty old now, did the husband get lashed for beating his wife? She gets a few gold coins. That's fantastic. At a time where she couldn't even replace her teeth, man. And this is why I think that this man is not only honestly, I got this question earlier from also saying, so are you saying that these apologists actually lie to fool people, are intentionally manipulating, etc.? Usually I say, I'm not sure, because a lot of them genuinely believe this stuff. They actually believe the Prophet is a great man, therefore I'm going to try to find confirmation bias that he is. But this guy was quoting the same hadith I'm looking at, with his apparent knowledge of Islam, which is more than mine, and intentionally misquoting it. Like, you'd have to be an idiot or a liar, one of the two. If you truly understand Arabic, if you have the background knowledge, and you see in the hadith that Muhammad said, don't beat the wives or don't beat the women, and then Allah revealed the verse, that's not a defense of the verse in any way. So this is why I think he is dishonest and slimy, in other words. Let me show you one last hadith before we move to the next thing. And I'll get to some of the comments and super chats, by the way. Thank you. I just can't interrupt the flow. And here it is. So remember earlier we were talking about how there's no issue if a woman gives up some of her rights voluntarily. Here's one example that is cited often. Sauda is one of the Prophet's wives, and she was she's an older woman. And I don't remember if I explicitly read that she was unattractive, but it's pretty implied. It's pretty clear that she's old and tall and not very, not really attractive. Sauda gave up her night to Aisha. And there's multiple explanations here, and I'll go through them. So the Prophet had to give each one of his wives one night of the week, or, in succession. And he has always said that if you are going to marry more than one woman, you have to be fair to them. And that includes, spending a night with each of them. But, that doesn't apply to the concubines. You don't have to be fair to the concubines in any way, except like the bare minimum of don't let them starve or something. So Sauda gave up her night to Aisha. Why did she do that? Voluntarily. Why did she do that? Let's go through the reasoning. So again, sources are going to be in the description. In both Sahih al-Bukhari and Sahih what's it called? Sahih Muslim. They both have this hadith. Sauda bint Zam'a, she gave her night to Aisha, and people were starting to ask why. So the first reason is because after the Prophet divorced her, she wanted to go back to him, so she did that. That is a weak hadith. It is false. The second one, the Prophet was about to divorce her, but then some scholars say that, like Al-Mawardi, but it's not in the hadith. So let's put that aside. Number 3 and 4 are verified. She thought he was going to divorce her, so she gave up her night to Aisha, so she would remain one of his wives in this life, and his wife in the afterlife, because they actually believe that this is such a great thing to be one of the Prophet's wives in the afterlife. It's a higher up position than just a regular woman in the afterlife. So the Prophet accepted that, giving up her night so he could be with Aisha. This is confirmed by many hadiths. And this is the last one. She kind of wanted to do him a favor. It was kind of a gift. She knew that he loved Aisha, because the Prophet never stopped talking about how much he loves Aisha more than any other person in the world and things like that. And that's the reason why she gave him her night as a gift. And that's pretty messed up when you think about it. So the Prophet preaches that you have to be fair to all your wives, but there he goes all the time boasting about how he's so in love with the youngest, shiniest new little thing, in front of all of his wives, in front of everybody, to the point that this poor woman felt like afraid that he was going to divorce her, or she felt so inferior that it was a gift to give him her night to be with Aisha. How sad is that marital life? How is that man I mean, if he's the perfect man, he would have heard this from her and he'd be like, "No, honey, no. Like I'm sorry that you feel that way. I do love you. Somehow I love all of you equally. And I'm not gonna let you give up your night. I like spending time with you." Instead, he was like, "Oh, okay, thank you. That's okay." What the hell? And let me so there's a lot of there's explanations saying it wasn't because she was too old that this happened, but in other explanations say, well, she was too old and that's why it happened. But that's not even the focus here. She wanted to stay like in his harem, basically. That's not what ismatahi means, but in his protection, like in the afterlife, and there's honor and preference in that. So I'm not sure if that's about the social hierarchy during the time of the Prophet, which absolutely did apply. It would be shameful to be divorced from the perfect man, from the leader of this tribe, from the most perfect man of all time. How dare you complain or want a divorce or get divorced? That's humiliating. And in the afterlife, it's such a great, if you genuinely believe in that, such a great position to be one of his wives in the afterlife. You see the amount of brainwashing that this poor woman had to go through? It was honor and preference for her to remain with the Prophet to the point that she thought to herself, I'm inferior to his other wife. He should be with her. And the Prophet accepted. And he would spend 2 nights at Aisha's place. Here's what really irked me. In this article, it says the benefits of this hadith. Like, what did we learn from this hadith? Tell me, what did we learn? جواز الصلح بين الزوجين. Sulh means making peace or compromising. It's allowed to make peace or compromise. What did she do wrong? That's not what the point of this is. She aged? She's not attractive enough? And yeah, thanks for reminding me. And after he dies, they're not allowed to remarry the Prophet's wives. That was put in the Quran. Imagine God creating the infinite, like since the beginning of time, since before time, he wrote this Quran. This is his ultimate plan. I'm going to have evolution take however many years. I'm going to have a lot of these prophets that their messages are going to be corrupted. I'm going to have all of this just so in the end, I will write in a verse that his wives cannot be remarried and that the men should respect his wives. How? Let's get back to it. So if a woman feels that her husband is separating from her, if he's not into her as much, and she's scared, she's worried or scared that he is going to leave her, it's okay to give some of her rights up, or some of the money or clothing or mabit or غير ذلك, the dimam that he spends with her, the time that he spends with her. It's okay. لا جناح عليها. There's no issue if she does that. And لا جناح عليه, there's no issue on his part either. Wow. I'm truly baffled. And this is not a fringe opinion. Look it up. This is, if you don't speak Arabic, you would have no idea that this is what Islam is. For the majority of Muslim women, this is what they have to go through. If they are unlucky to live in a place that is not at all influenced by any sort of law that's separated from Sharia, that's separated from Islam, this is what they have to work with. And then this is the second thing that we learned from this hadith. Bayan kamalu aqli Sauda. Sauda, this is evidence of how complete her mind is, how sane she is, how mature she is. This is evidence that she is mature. Like what a great example of a woman is what they're saying. This is what women should be like. And she gave up some of her right to remain one of the Ummahat al-Mu'mineen, the mothers of the believers. No pressure at all. You see how when apologists say Aisha could have divorced Muhammad when she was old enough or rejected him, how could she, a child, reject the leader of the tribe that it's such an honor to be with in this life and the afterlife? If you don't see that the pressure from all of this, the pressure that if you genuinely believe that this man is magic, if he's from God, that pressure is astronomical. I can't imagine what these women were thinking in their heads. Even Aisha has hadiths where she talks about, women have been more harmed since you allowed beating, or I haven't seen women suffer as much as Muslim women, or I see your God rushing to fulfill your desires. ما أرى ربك إلا يسارع في هواك. She had moments where she sort of broke free, and then there were moments where you realized she was totally under the spell. She was boasting that he loves her more than anyone. She felt special. That's an abuse tactic. Even if Muhammad was so nice to her, you don't realize that this woman, Aisha, for example, she was raised for this. And his other wife just accepted her position. It's sad. Here's the third thing that we learned. If a wife gave up her day or night, then that's okay. The husband can accept that, and he can actually have sex with the I don't want to finish that. Number 4, if the husband has 4 wives, right? Then they can do that. If the husband has or multiple wives. Remember how Muslims always say if you have multiple wives, you have to be fair with them. What part of this dynamic is fair? And at the end of the day, they have the gall that these scholars have the audacity to say, but no pressure though. Here's another hadith before I get to some comments and then the next video. This hadith says a man should not be asked why he beat his wife. I can show you there are multiple versions of it on sunnah.com. And they're all like either weak or not commented on whether it's weak or not. But here's a Hasan version. It's not weak. And more damning than that is not the how correct the hadith or how verified it is. I'll talk about the explanation of it too. So I was a guest at the home of Omar one night, and in the middle of the night, he went to hit his wife, and I separated them. Then he went to bed and he said to me, oh, Ash'ath, I think Ash'ath is the name. Let's see. Whatever it is, I can't read it in Arabic. Sorry, in English. Yeah, Al-Ash'ath. Learn from me something that I heard from the Messenger of Allah. Can it be more damning? A man should not be asked why he beats his wife. And do not go to sleep until you have prayed the witr. And I forgot the third thing. These are the men who are transmitting our hadiths. So it irked me not only that this hadith is present, but let's say it is a weak hadith for a second. Then why do the scholars bother to find the benefits of the hadith, fawaid al-hadith? They say it is weak, but here's what we learn from it. So the fact that it's weak is not because this is such a far-fetched thing to be said. No, it's just it happened to be not verified to the fullest extent. So here's the benefit here. The man should not be asked why he beat his wife, by other people, outsiders, because the reason could be something embarrassing or like something private for either of them. And that is left to the husband because he is ordered, ma'mur bita'dibi zawjatihi, to discipline his wife. You know how the Sheikh Al-Azhar was saying it's not an order? Well, you do have an order to maintain the sanctity of your house and whatever that means, and that's part of it. It's open to interpretation by men. And the second point is you have to keep the secrets that are between the couple. And this is a symptom of an overarching problem in Muslim communities. This secrecy, not just about the abuse of women, but the mistakes that someone made. For example, I really don't want to be commenting on this because I didn't actually watch the horrendous so-called debate between Ali Dawah and Apostate Prophet. But I've seen a lot of commentary by Muslims. Some of them are saying, hey, this was embarrassing. This had nothing to do with the debate. You didn't really do anybody any favors. We hate AP, but still, that was bad. And there's a lot more Muslims saying you should be advising them privately. There's this sentiment stemming from Hadith, I believe, that you shouldn't advertise the mistakes or the scandals of your fellow brother or sister. You should be advising them privately. But what does that look like? If a man's beating his wife over the limit that Islam allows, you're supposed to go and talk to him privately. Brother, don't beat your wife till she's green in the arm. These are private matters. These matters have to do with their family, the honor of the family. You're not supposed to talk about it. So whether this hadith is weak or hasan, this is something that we learned from it. Not we, but people who follow this religion, and not all of them, thankfully. This is a teachable moment here. Let's get to the, I'll read a few super chats and then I'll get to the next video. And there are more hadiths at the end. So, thank you, Secular Sekai, for the super chat. Super sticker. I appreciate that. Algebra says, thank you as well. Surah made up. Oh, you who believed, cultivated prayers, believed women are plowing fields, treated them so, are among Allah's most faithful slaves. You know what? In English, who knows? This could have been a real verse. Looking forward to you. Oh, thank you, Secular Sakai again. Looking forward to you and Secular Spirit collaborating more. Any plans to do more videos with Infinite Noodle later this year? I do have a video with Secular Spirit on Saturday on his channel. Please check it out. I'll advertise it. And Infinite Noodle, yeah, our schedules are just not aligning, but hopefully if they do, we will do something. And yeah, something I want to comment on. So there's this narrative that Islam came in and stopped a certain domestic violence, and that's the point of all these hadiths. I don't think it's necessary for me to comment on that specifically, but I'll show you a hadith in the end, or not a hadith, sorry. It's not exactly a hadith. It's a narration by a scholar about how the Arabs were in the old days. And it goes against this narrative that the Arabs used to bury their daughters alive and all that stuff. This idea that people were savages up until Islam came and fixed it all up. And if that is true for a second, let's presume that is true. Now what? We're past that point. I've given this analogy before. One of the first most common cars that changed the industry of automobiles is the Ford Model T. It wasn't one of the first cars ever to be built, but it was one of the first cars to be assembled in a more affordable way on the assembly line. And it changed the history of automotive history forever. But would you drive a Ford Model T today? This old, clunky, inefficient, dangerous, slow car? No. Was it better than walking back then? Arguably, yeah, depending on the trip. Is it relevant now? No, we're way past that. So good for you, for driving a crappy car a long time ago. It's time that we move on. So that defense of it improved things, which is, again, dubious, and we can't even verify that, is not really a defense of how it is lagging behind now. That is my opinion on that. Now, let me put the next video. The next video is called... It's called Mistreatment of Women in Islam, or Violence Against Women. And let's see what he has to say.
And my last point, and this is a very important point. People in the West love to talk about the problem of Islam, the problem of Muslims. They say Muslims treat women badly. Muslims are violent towards women. And you know why? Look at their Quran. Their Quran is the reason. Is that Isha time? Okay.
He had to just check. Is it Isha? Is it time to go pray? I don't know if that's like virtue signaling or not, or he's actually that adherent to religion to the point that he can't finish his religious lecture. Just, let it be.
Does anybody know a reason why this is not true?
Does anybody know a reason why the Quran is not the source of... Let's hear what he said again.
Okay. Violent towards women. Muslims. They say Muslims treat women badly. Muslims are violent towards women. And you know why? Look at their Quran. Their Quran is the reason.
The Quran is the reason.
Does anybody know a reason why this is not true?
Tell us.
Because other people also treat women badly.
Are you serious? Because other people treat women badly. That's whataboutism to a T. The Quran is not the source because other people do it too. We'll hear him out more.
Violence against women is a human problem. Do you know which country in the world rates the worst in terms of violence against women in the whole world? Not India, not Saudi Arabia. El Salvador. El Salvador. Do you know how many Muslims there are in El Salvador? Not very many.
Okay, let me save you the trouble for a second. I'm going to include some sources in the comments, but I want to read this little bit from one of these sources. This is from the UN Women. The occurrence of violence in the region, the Middle East region, is shaped by discrimination against women and the presence of attitudes that perpetuate negative gender stereotypes, like what I've been talking about for the past hour, like women are infants and they need to be disciplined. For example, in Morocco, 60% of men consider that wives should tolerate the violence to keep the family together. And that's Morocco. That's a country that's so close to Europe where there's a lot of tourists, where everyone seems to think it's so chill, you know? 60% of men think women should tolerate a bit of beating. And the number goes up to 90% in Egypt. What a shame. Remember what I showed you earlier about Sheikh al-Azhar? This? Well, some people are protesting and they're saying, no, we want to start enacting, well, people, I mean women usually. We want to start enacting laws against that. And people objected because it's against religious rights. When having a law against violence is against your religious right, what kind of religion are you following? What are you saying about your own religion? How do you expect people not to accuse your religion of violence when you're the one defending it against anti-violence rules? It's really sad. When it comes to Palestine, the number of men who agreed with the previous statement remains high at 63%, while in Lebanon it goes down to a significantly lower but hard to overlook 26%. And you know why that is? 26% only? Because it's a lot more liberal. It's a lot less adherent to Islam for the most part. There's a lot more people who aren't Muslim as well. Don't you see that the factors are, there's a correlation there. Legislation often fails to comprehensively address all forms of violence against women, and enforcement mechanisms are frequently inadequate. You know why? For example, marital rape is not a thing in Islam. The only reason a woman can refuse to sleep with her husband is if she's sick, if she's on her period, because that is filth according to Islam. If a husband forces himself, then some apologists say, well, Allah says don't harm them, but there isn't an actual precedent for a husband being punished, or at least for the majority, it's not a crime. So of course there's going to be more violence. When you give men a loaded gun and then you wonder why there's more violence. So it's disgusting that this man,
Latin America.
It's disgusting that now he's talking about Latin America. They beat their women too. If he, let me address this, and I'm sorry today, I'm irked, so I'm letting these comments get to me somehow. Nice, you found a little country where the problem is worse, therefore you have no problem now. Wait, am I misreading this? Yeah, sorry, you're talking about the apologist. Yeah, he found a country where the problem is worse. Forget Egypt with 100 million population in there. Not all of them are Muslims. Not all of them are violent towards women. But only 90% of men in Egypt think that a woman has to bear some amount of beating. Yeah, good job.
According to the two.
Good job, Jonathan. You're giving a great example. And now I got to give you a bigger trigger warning, because this is going to be just a tweet, a censored tweet about the violent thing that happened recently in Iran. So turn your head away now. Heartbreaking. Today in Iran, this man is holding his 17-year-old wife's head after beheading her. She had fled to Turkey to be safe, but was forced back. This happens very often. It's not just that it happens in the Middle East. People would flee away, and then they would be chased by their brother, by their father, by their husband, by whoever. In Iran, a father who beheaded his 14-year-old daughter got 8 years prison, but a woman who removed her hijab got 24 years. And this is a man posing. There's a video. He's walking with the head of his 17-year-old ex-wife. Now, does Islam say behead your wife? No. No, Islam doesn't say behead your wife. Does Islam say beat your wife? Yeah, but not harshly. Don't leave a mark. And if you leave a mark, you could pay for it in money. How disgusting is this? Don't you see how it's a first step? There is a lot of violence against women everywhere in the world, but it's not being made better because of Islam. It's not combating the culture that we keep scapegoating. Every time they say it's culture, it's not religion. Where did this culture come from? So if this region had issues with women, right, 1400 years ago, Islam came and it legitimized those issues. Or if it meant to combat them, what has it been doing for 1400 years? Why is Islam such an utter failure at resolving these issues? Even if it's not the cause, for a second, let's presume it's not a catalyst here. Why has Islam done nothing? Why are the people who are saving these women outsiders? Why is it ex-Muslims who speak up for their rights? Why are there, when Muslim men or women talk about this, they're chastised? Why? It irks me because people think that I do this to vilify Muslims in any way. No, the victims are Muslims. Some of them can't stand up for themselves. Some of them don't know that they need to stand up for themselves. Some of them are so deluded by whatever version of Islam they're following or not even following that they would forget about all those people who suffer through it. And then they go fight the wrong people. This girl was married off at 12 years old. And to say that, for example, is not Islamic, when the Prophet married his wife at 6, this sets a precedent for abuse when there's this power dynamic where the man is supposed to teach his wife. He's supposed to discipline his wife. He's dominant over her, and she is so much younger. And he can beat her to some extent, but we trust him not to go overboard. This is just ABC. It's going to keep happening. It doesn't mean that every Muslim is going to beat his wife. It doesn't mean that it's in every single case, but it's going to happen in larger numbers as long as we have that same baseline of abuse that's normal. Now, I don't know what I wanted to say. Let's go back to, I'm going to try to skip over some of what he says because he just keeps talking about countries.
2012 UN report is the worst region in terms of violence against women.
Here's one more thing. One of those websites, I didn't screenshot that part, but the violence against women in the Middle East is underreported. Anyone with half a brain would realize that it's underreported. When they try to report it, what happens? They're either punished for that or ignored, or it's not put on the sheets. It's not put on the numbers. Why do we pretend like they're not underreported? What is this race to the bottom going to achieve when he says, look at this place has more violence? What has your religion done to separate itself, this region, from the rest? Why isn't the violence against women in Muslim areas 0% or close to it? Why is it the case that it's high up there? Even when underreported, it's way high up there. It's pathetic. It's pathetic when they go to these lows of, at least it's not this country.
And this goes to show how I think misleading public discussion in America is and the West is, because I didn't even know about dowry killings until like 2012. I didn't even know they existed.
Now he talks about dowry killings and that there's one woman kind of honor killed or dowry killed in India every single day. I did not have time to verify those stats. But if that is true, that should be a focus of people's attention to work towards that. And I'm sure there are advocates against that, trying to raise attention and awareness. What does bringing that up have to do? So his whole point here, and I cannot bear to listen to him any longer, his whole point is, we are unfairly being targeted as Muslims. There's other violence, but people only pay attention to us. There's an element of truth to that. There's an element of truth to the fact that post 9/11, for example, Islam is under, not just Islam, Muslims are under larger scrutiny and often unfairly characterized. But to say that, therefore, we don't actually have violence issues that are on a bigger scale than most countries, to make yourself the victim here. Let's see what else he has.
Family says it was a kitchen accident, and the police don't investigate it.
Yeah, he's talking about India, how these numbers are underreported because the family lies and then the police don't investigate it. Don't you see, you absolute moron, that that's what happens in the Middle East?
This is a huge problem. No one in America even knows about this, because what are people in America always talking about? Honor killings. Muslims are the ones who kill.
So if his point from this video is to say, people focus on Muslims too much. Fine, sure, but what value have you added here? He made no commentary on what the steps are to reduce that. He made no commentary about how all he did was just give excuses for why you can lightly beat your wife in some cases. You are the enabler. You are the reason this keeps happening, especially when you put on a Caucasian face, to this violence, to this ugliness. Muslims always love pointing out this apologist because it's evidence, it's confirmation that, look, even a white person, a Westerner, can join Islam. This means that Islam is objectively true. He's their poster boy for this kind of stuff. And I'm so amped up right now because I cannot believe that it's effective. It's working. What do you know about violence in the Middle East? Why are you making things worse and pretending like you're the victim?
There's more dowry, usually, according to the statistics.
It's not a race to the bottom.
Who gets off the hook? We in America get off the hook. We don't talk about violence against women in our
You don't talk about violence against women in America? Have you been asleep?
own societies. And when I was in the UK last weekend, or maybe 2 weeks ago, I can't remember when it was. There was I was on the tube, the underground train, and the guy next to me is reading this big full-page headline. It says, "Muslim convert beheads granny in garden." I was like, oh, wow. Turns out it wasn't a Muslim.
Right. Okay. Wow. In that case, it wasn't a Muslim. But there are examples from just the past year of this happening, or acid being thrown at women in Europe or in other places, not even in the Middle East, including the Middle East, like the example that I just showed of a man parading a head. So what does your anecdote of, oh, they got it wrong that one time, it wasn't a convert, what does that have to do with anything? There are more than enough precedents of that actually happening.
In my neighborhood in the last year, 3 women have been beheaded. Nobody talked about it. Nobody cared.
What kind of neighborhood do you live in?
Because this is important when it's terrorism, when it's Muslim.
No. Now I highly doubt that. What kind of neighborhood does he live in where 3 women are beheaded and it doesn't make the news? You see, this is why I call him dishonest and a liar. I find that extremely hard to believe, especially given all the lies that he's already woven right in front of our eyes using the sources that we just read. What neighborhood do you live in? What country is that? In the US? I presume that's where he is. If it's in the Middle East, then no, that doesn't help his point.
Muslims being violent, then people pay attention. But when it's our own society, people don't think about that. And when we allow ourselves to simply be the center of conversation, we say, please, let me defend Islam against your accusations that Islam is bad against.
You did a crappy job of that, defending Islam. You are the reason this keeps happening. I mean, him and the people who straight up just say, this is what you need to be doing. All he's doing is drawing attention away from them and enabling the soft beating of women.
Attacks women, or Islam is misogynist, Islam is unfair to women. Muslims have problems of violence against women in their communities.
You don't say.
Muslims have problems of mistreatment of women in the United States, in every country. And those problems need to be addressed by the Muslim community. We need to address those issues.
Then why aren't you doing that?
But
how would you be the one preaching that we need to address those issues while at the same time enabling the mechanisms that cause these issues to happen? Sure, you don't say go absolutely kill the person or beat her till whatever, but you just enabled the first step to that. Way to make yourself a victim.
It can't be an excuse that other people in our country don't also address the issues that they have.
That's not the point at all. That's deflection. I'm all for addressing the issues, and people are already doing that. I don't know if this video, I can't remember if this is older than the Me Too movement, for example, but he wasn't out there calling for the Me Too movement. He was out there saying, not me, not us. I understand the sentiment to want to defend Muslims from this narrative that they're all violent and so on. I am all for that. But this is the same guy who in the same lecture, in the same breath, was telling us about how you're allowed to beat a woman. You see that the hypocrisy? You see why it bothers me? I don't know how people are supposed to look at Muslims. Like you're straight up an example of a liar. Absolutely disgusting. Let's go to the next video. There's a couple more videos, and then I'll talk about the hadiths at the end. It's something I want to comment on. You cannot mock Islam without attracting fascists who hate Muslims. It's inevitable. So here's what I have to say about that. Since day one, I've made it very clear how I feel about Muslims, how I'm not vilifying them, how I say they are better than Islam. Islam is holding them back. I've made that super clear from day one. And I've expressed how me just simply pointing out what this guy is doing, like, was there any mockery today in what I said? Was there anything unjustifiable in what I said today? Me literally reading the sources from Islam, that is enough for someone who is a fascist or hates Muslims or whatever you want to call it. That's enough ammunition for them. But whose fault is that? Is it my fault that I'm literally reading Islam? Is it the fault of the Muslim who has no idea what the hell's going on? Not necessarily. Is it the fault of that preacher? Yes. Is it the fault of anyone who advertises Islam without knowing what it is? Yeah. Is it the fault of someone who advertises it knowing what it is but lies? Yes. I mean, I feel for the progressives out there who are trying to reform Islam, but are they really, really reforming Islam? None of the people who I've spoken about here are actually doing that. Shabir Ali, for example, he's pretty progressive, but has he said anything except at the end of each video, we need to re-examine this in our context today and blah, 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 and nothing happens. So I don't understand how people accuse me of enabling people who hate Muslims when the source of this, one of the many, like sometimes it's just unjustified people just hate brown people, for example. I understand that. And I'm one of them. Like, you don't realize that I'd be profiled with Muslims in every way. I don't have a label on me that says I'm ex-Muslim, don't come pick on me, pick on this guy. So it's in my best interest to look out for my people, so to speak, for my family, for my friends. I'm not doing this because I dislike them. But I will not simply let it all slip and let people be victimized by this, just because there might be someone who would take a soundbite from my video quoting Islam and use it against Muslims. That's not my fault. Go look at what Islam is saying. So this is the narrative that they try to use to silence critics. And it may be on an individual level, it may be an institutional level. It's that this critic is enabling violence against Muslims. What uptick am I causing? The amount of harm that I cause inadvertently by not even causing, by just quoting Islam, pales in comparison to the amount of people who reach out to me and say, hey, this has been helpful. I'm a Muslim. I've had questions. I felt insane for a while. I can't believe that this is actually what it says, and so on. It's not my fault that that's what Islam is. It really isn't. So you can't really blame me for that. What university is he teaching in? Can anyone report this guy to the authorities? That's what people don't realize, that this is not an extreme opinion. This is as soft as they come. This is why I feel insane sometimes, that it's an open air prison. No one realizes the insanity of what some people out there believe. No one realizes the insanity of what some preachers or all preachers preach. Now let's go to the next video by also this guy, and a guest appearance by our favorite pedophilia apologist. I'll get to that in a second. All right, so this is a hadith about a woman is like a crooked rib. So let me show you the hadith first for the, well, it's a very long hadith, but it's damning. So let's go through it. So in this hadith, I don't know if you're able to see it. It's going to be in the comments anyway. You should give charity and ask much forgiveness and so on. Okay, here we go. A wise lady among them said, why is it, Messenger of Allah, that our folk is in bulk in hell? Women are the majority of hell, is what Muhammad said before. Upon this, the Prophet observed, you curse too much and are ungrateful to your spouses. The reason why you're the majority in hell is because you curse too much and you're ungrateful to your husbands. The husbands who feed you and clothe you, how dare you? I have seen none lacking in common sense and failing in religion and robbing the wisdom of the wise besides you, women. That's what Muhammad is saying. Upon this, the woman remarked, what is wrong with our common sense and with our religion? He said, your lack of common sense can be well judged from the fact that the evidence of two women is equal to one man. that the testimony of two women in Sharia court is equal to one man. And the apologetics for that are just bizarre. And Muhammad uses that as proof that women are lacking in intelligence. That is the proof of the lack of common sense. And you spend some nights and days in which you do not offer prayer, and in the month of Ramadan, you do not observe fast. That is a failing in religion. Let me clarify. When women are on their period, the period is considered najasa, filth. And they're not allowed to pray because God thinks it's icky or some shit. And we're told by apologists it's mercy because they're PMSing, it's hard for them. That's not true. It's because it's filthy. The blood is filthy. And here it is used against them. You're lacking in religion because you don't pray as much as men, because you're forced not to pray by what God said, or because of physical pain. If that's the case, if that's the reasoning. And that's why you're lacking, and that's why we will talk down to you. He justifies using his own words. I don't know why. Maybe I'm getting the wrong version of the hadith. I'm sorry. I might have missed the hadith that he is quoting about the rib. So I'll just let him read it.
And yet we still are obsessed with our own, because of the worldview from which we come, we're obsessed with reading these hadiths through this kind of what sometimes people call a hermeneutic of suspicion. We look at these hadiths and we're suspicious of them.
Let me comment on that. We're obsessed with looking at hadiths with a hermeneutics of suspicion. Do you mean skepticism? Because I think skepticism is important. You know how people keep touting Islam and science go together? Well, the scientific methods means that you need to doubt everything and prove it. So approaching hadith with skepticism, trying to ponder both sides of the narrative is not a bad thing. That is the just thing to do. If it is absolutely defensible, if it is the truth, then there's nothing to fear with that approach. That you would want that approach because it would prove empirically that even if you look at it with skepticism, there's no way to make it to be a bad thing. But it is full of suspicious things. So it's not a bad thing that people look at it with skepticism.
Sexist hadiths, like the famous hadith that says that a woman was created from a bent rib, and if you try to straighten her out, you'll break her. So you have to enjoy her as she is. If you try to straighten out and breaking her, you'll be divorced from her. People look at this, oh, this is sexist. But why is it that we jump to that conclusion? We should actually just look at the meaning of the hadith first. And the reason I thought about this is because I was, before I got married, I was reading this, Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus book that everyone was telling me I had to read. And what was it saying? It was saying, don't try to solve your wife's problems for her. Don't expect her to be like you. You have to accept her for as she is. Don't expect her to change. You just have to be there for her. And sometimes she's going to do things that don't make sense. You have to accept that this is because men are from Mars and women are from Venus, right? And then I realized when I read this hadith, this is exactly the same message. Here it's talking to men. It's saying, men, and I guarantee you, if you get all the men in this conference in one room, they'll all start talking about how, I wish my wife were more reasonable. Why doesn't she just think like I do? Why doesn't she just see it this way and that? If men sit around like this all the time, they're going to be miserable. And they're going to end up with miserable marriages. Because you're never going to get your spouse to be exactly like you. You're never going to be able to straighten her out to be like you.
I just want you to remember that often in these apologetics, there's a bit of truth, and then the rest is not true. So him stating that you will never be able to mold your wife or even your husband the way that you want, that bit is true. But when you focus on that bit being true, you forget the context of the hadith and whether the hadith actually meant that. And I'll play this and I'll show you what our favorite pedophilia apologist says, and then I'll show you the hadith.
You have to accept her for the person she is. And then if you do that, you can have a happy life together. So the reason I thought of this when I was reading this book on men are from Mars, women are from Venus, I realized this is the same message in the hadith. But no one had ever, actually there are some scholars like Javed Ahmed Ghamdi have actually interpreted the hadith as such. But when you see on discussion lists, or when Muslims get together, or when there's a conference and some speaker comes and talks about hadith, there's always someone who gets up in the audience and says, but brother, what about the hadith?
So you notice that he said, Javed al-Ghamdi does interpret it that way. Just keep that in mind.
Hadith of the crooked rib, and isn't this sexist? Why is it that we always jump on that bandwagon? Why don't we stop and say, maybe the Prophet actually has teachings, has wisdom to offer us. And maybe it's actually talking to men in this case and telling men that they have to change the way that they look at their marriages and their relationships.
So why do we jump on the bandwagon of saying that it's sexist? Could it be because for the past hour and a half I've been talking about your lectures where you were being blatantly sexist, even in the softest version of it? Could it be? I don't know. It must be because people are Islamophobic and stuff and unfair. This is the hadith. Treat women nicely for a woman. No, it doesn't say treat women nicely. Okay. وَأَسْتَوْصُوا بِالنِّسَاءِ. It's kind of, it's not that direct, but let's just leave it at that. Treat women nicely, for a woman is created from a rib, and the most curved portion of the rib is its upper portion. So if you should try to straighten it, it will break. But if you leave it as it is, it will remain crooked. So treat women nicely. Again, it doesn't explicitly say treat women nicely, but I'll leave it at that. Let's first take the interpretation that he gave us, right? Why is Muhammad using this language of analogies and metaphors and so on? Because that's the time that he was in. Those are the simplistic people, like, or that's the way that they spoke about things. They would exaggerate everything. They'd be like, "Wallahi, O Prophet, I will give you my family as ransom." And he walked for this many days, or she gave up all her money and didn't eat for a week. All that stuff, all these analogies and metaphors, it's just an outdated way of talking. If he were from Allah, wouldn't he know that an analogy is lacking? Like, for him to say women are like, aside from the fact that an analogy can be understood so many ways by people who mean well, an analogy will always be lacking. A woman is like a rib, don't try to straighten her. What about the man? Like, why is it always talking, men do this to women, men, discipline your women, men teach the women are obedient. Why? Even if that is the interpretation that you're going to take. And what I care about more than what did Muhammad actually mean, because I genuinely don't think he's a prophet from God, I care about the lie that's going to come up in a second here. So let me show you what Omar Suleiman says. Let me pull up his video in a second. So I have a video about Omar Suleiman's whole lecture about Aisha, and he had such a creepy smile just throughout the whole lecture, just smiling as he's talking about Aisha, a child being married off that young, and so on. He keeps up that energy here. Let me play it right now. Tell me if the audio is good.
Deal kindly with your wives. Now, if you listen to that, you say, well, what does that exactly mean, right? Not a single sharh, not a single explanation of this hadith is that the woman is inherently deficient as opposed
Not a single explanation is that the woman is inherently deficient. Remember that.
To the men, that she's bent, that she's crooked. And, it goes to the general idea of assigning evil to Eve, which we'll talk about inshallah ta'ala next time, where we talk about Eve and this particular idea of assigning evil exclusively to her and to women in general, right? That women are inherently deficient or crooked and evil. This
not a single explanation. None of what I cited so far, and in so many videos saying, the Prophet himself saying, naqisatu aqlin wa din, lacking in intelligence and faith. None of that exists according to this liar.
This is not a concept in Islam. So that's definitely not the sharh of the hadith. It's not the explanation of the hadith. It's not the context of the hadith and what the Prophet ﷺ was saying. What was the Prophet ﷺ saying? Either he was being literal.
Either. See, this is the problem. We don't even know what the guy meant. Like, did he mean literally they're created from a rib? Which, again, we're going to go back to evolution and creationism. And then Muslims say, well, he created her from a rib, but it was also evolution because it's metaphysical. Either or. Truth doesn't take either or. Truth is not an analogies that could be misunderstood. So how is he just so complacent saying, oh, either he meant it literally, magic, or
and saying that the woman was created from the rib, okay? Not the most crooked part, but that she was created from the rib. And he simply went on to explain what the most crooked or what the most bent part of the rib was. Or the Prophet ﷺ was using...
So let's take that first interpretation. This is why I find them hard to trust to any degree. So he's saying it could have been that he was talking literally, she was created from a rib, and then he was just talking about what the bent part of the rib is. Like it's some biology lesson for no reason. He's like, God created woman from a rib, and the rib has a curved part. The fact that he would entertain this as an interpretation and throw it out there as an apologetic interpretation, right? Like don't focus on the bad one. It could have been literal in this dumb asinine interpretation. What is that? What kind of man speaks like that? Like if we suspend our belief that a God could have created Eve from a rib, why would Muhammad say that and then say, and by the way, this is the anatomy of a rib? How do you trust this man?
An analogy. And most of the scholars said he was using an analogy. And what is that analogy? What was the Prophet ﷺ saying? He was saying, stop trying to change and mold your wives into what you want them to be.
Except this guy gave a lecture that was an hour long about how Muhammad married Aisha at 6. Muhammad groomed her, raised her, and he was talking about all the signs of grooming without realizing that it's grooming. He's saying, don't mold your wife, but Muhammad molded Aisha. The way that he was saying Aisha would teach everybody, she knew the most about Islam because Muhammad taught her about Islam all the time. That's literally molding her to be his protege in a sense. When Aisha thought, he brought up this disgusting man with that disgusting smile, brought up the this so-called fact that Aisha thought Muhammad was such a handsome man in defense of her not having been a young child. Like he was saying she was 6 and then 9, and then one of the defenses is, how could she have been abused if she found him so handsome? This is that man. And now he's saying it means don't mold your wife. That's what I'm saying. Sometimes it might not even be that they're intentionally dishonest. I don't know about this guy. It's that in their mind, the definitions are absolutely broken. Treat women kindly, but you can beat them, but don't leave a mark. At the same time, both things are true. In their mind, don't mold your wife, but marry her young, that's fine. Absolutely broken.
Because there is an impatience. And Imam an-Nawawi rahimahullah, in the explanation of the hadith, he says the Prophet ﷺ was addressing the impatience that men had with their wives in trying to, make them exactly as they wanted them to be, right? You are supposed to act like this, you're supposed to do this, you're supposed to do that, right? Addressing all of their habits, addressing everything. We're not talking about haram and addressing things that are forbidden and growing together and pleasing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and distancing ourselves from all that is considered disobedience to Allah.
Listen to this part again.
About haram and addressing to do that, right? Addressing all of their habits, addressing everything. We're not talking about haram and addressing things that are forbidden and growing together and pleasing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and distancing ourselves from all that is considered disobedience to Allah.
Okay. So here he's saying, don't mold the women, or like the men are impatient. They wanted to mold the women exactly how they want with their habits and everything. But simultaneously, Muhammad is berating them for gossiping, for being ungrateful, as he put it. The woman is always the villain. And simultaneously, he's saying, except unless there's something haram, then you can discipline them, right? Like that's different. You can bend her in that case. What are the things that are haram? Disobeying Allah. But there's also nushuz, disobeying the husband. It is seen as an extension sometimes. Like you're disobeying Allah by not obeying the sanctity of your marriage, which is obeying your husband. You see how there's these insidious ins, these back doors, these technicalities. So all he's saying here is lip service, nothing.
But the idea of trying to mold your wife into exactly what you want her to be, right? So the Prophet ﷺ is saying, look, you're not going to get the perfect woman, all right? Just like you're not the perfect man, all right? You're not going to, and he was using the example of the rib, because just like if you took a rib and you tried to just straighten it out like that, you're going to end up breaking someone and killing yourself, okay? And the Prophet ﷺ says in a hadith in Muslim, he said, so leave it bent, and that is better for you. Otherwise, if you break it, it is divorce. So the Prophet ﷺ was saying breaking it is divorce. So the Prophet ﷺ was saying, look, everyone is going to have certain traits that you don't like and you don't agree with, but this is part of who she is. And just like you have your issues, she has her issues, right?
That's
Some
what
of
he
the
was
scholars,
saying.
they said that the woman's nature is more complex than the man's nature. And that's not to, to buy into this concept that women are crazy human beings and insane and emotional wrecks, and men.
What concept? The concept that your prophet was citing? that women are emotional or lacking in intelligence. Is that what you're talking about?
Are the ones that are logical and know what they're doing? No, but that a lot of times men have a difficult time understanding women. All right, they don't. The nature of the man and the woman is different, and men have a difficult time understanding that. And the Prophet ﷺ is saying not to interfere with that, and not to pretend like you understand everything, because there's certainly going to be gaps here. You're not going to be able to.
That's what you got from all that. All right, putting all of that aside, remember what he said. There's not a single sharh, which means explanation. There's not a single explanation that said anything degrading, in that about that hadith. Aside from everything else that I've cited that wasn't about that hadith. He's a freaking liar. Like right there. I don't know if he doesn't understand Arabic. Am I more of a scholar than these people? I'm not. I'm just some guy. So is he not able to read? Here's one explanation in English from Islam QA. The meaning is that she will inevitably have some crookedness or shortcomings in her character. Hence, it was narrated in another hadith, Sahihain. I have not seen any lacking in rational ability and failing in religion, but robbing the wisdom of the wise besides you women. That's the hadith that I read earlier. That's why I had the link here. Muhammad himself, they're using Muhammad's words to give you that sharh that you said never existed, you two-faced liar, you smiley pedophilia apologist. Yeah, women are complicated. What does that mean? We can't understand them, therefore, there's something else. And then here's from bin Baz, his website. It says here, هذا نقص كتبه الله عليها ليس فيها إثم. And I can see how that would be even twisted. So this means that is a deficiency in her that God mandated on her, that God created her with, that it's not her fault. You see how infantilizing that is? Oh, you're broken, but it's not your fault. God created you from a rib. And I can see an apologist who wants to twist this and translate it into English and say, God says women are not responsible for the way that men treat them, or something like that. And again, I want to remind you, if you want to say this sheikh I don't like, or this sheikh doesn't represent Islam, or this sheikh is Saudi, or this sheikh is Kuwaiti, those are real women who live under those rulings. Those are real women, so care about them. So get out there and do something. And here's more. And it's very indicative of the mentality. Like everything I'm reading here, that's the opinion of a knowledgeable man, let alone the average stupid man. It is indicative of the mentality of the whole community. The fact that these are just on the internet, just like openly, and even before the internet, these are just openly available, is the problem. Please feel our suffering. It says here, فَيَنْبَغِي لَهَا أَن تَعْتَرِفْ بِذَلِكَ. She has to admit that. You see, after the previous sentence, God created her with a deficiency. It's not her fault, but she has to admit that. Because the Prophet, لَا يَنْطِقُ عَنِ الْهَوَى. That's from a verse. The Prophet does not basically talk out of his butt. The Prophet is telling the truth. And he said these things about her, then the Prophet must be right. Even a good man who's a good pious Muslim who thinks his wife is just as important as him will have to believe this. And then when he sees the smallest crack, when he sees the smallest deficiency from her, he's going to think, well, of course, that's what Muhammad warned me about. This is how you turn good people into bad people, with dogma. Here's from Khalid al-Sabt. It says, فَقَالَ بَعْضُ أَهْلِ الْعِلْمِ الْمُرَادْ بِهِ اللِّسَانِ الْأَعْوَجْ مَا فِيهِ رَأْسُهُ وَلِسَانُهَا أَعْلَى الْمَرَأِ. So here he's saying this analogy, and this is the problem with analogies. This crookedness is the tongue, the crooked tongue, which means, she talks back, she gossips, that kind of thing. So the analogy is that the crookedness is at the top of the rib. The woman's tongue is at the top of her. Therefore, he means that women have, their tongues are going to be crooked, and you have to be patient with them before you beat them. That's only as a last resort. Not a single sharh, says Omar Suleiman. Not a single explanation. Not one. This guy couldn't Google at all. And again, I remind you, I am not digging up dirt. This is not me going and searching for these interpretations. This is the obvious. The only other interpretations I can find are apologetic ones, like I said, that usually are in English, usually are not relying on any original sources. I wish it was different, but it isn't. I get the impression you don't like Sheikh Omar. Yeah, I have my reasons. Here's Islam way. And all of these websites have nothing to do with Islam, by the way. All these websites with Islam in the name, nothing to do with Islam. استوصوا بالنساء خيرا لأن النساء قاصرات في العقول. They're lacking in their minds. قاصرات في الدين, lacking in their religion. وفي التفكير, in their thinking. في جميع شؤونهن, in all of their matters. They're lacking. فإنهن خلقن من ضلع. Because, they were created from a rib. They're going to be less. That is the problem with using analogies. And God would know that. If I can see that, then God would see that in the future, the future that's going to happen. He would have known to tell Muhammad, don't use dumb analogies. The world is going to be way past that. We're going to be at specifics. We're going to have decimal points that make differences. And this guy's talking about ribs. Astaghfirullah, as they say. I'm really amped up for this one. I'm really sorry. I don't usually lose my cool like that, but I don't know how else to react, honestly. Let me share the next video. So this video is about, this is the last video that I'm going to talk about today, and it is about women in hell. Let me show you the verse first, I suppose. The verse first. Okay. 1 second while I pull that up. All right. So, like I said, this took me a while because every time I would start researching, I would get annoyed and I would have to stop. Oh, this is annoying. Now I cannot share the screen for some reason. I don't know what is happening today. I think this is Allah's will. Give me a second. Please hang on. And hopefully we're back. Let's see if that works. No, that doesn't work. Okay, I'm sorry, everybody. Give me a second. Let me play the video in the meantime. Okay, here is the video.
Hadiths that talk about whether or not there's, that there's more women in hellfire than men. Do you know that actually, in the chapter of Sahih Muslim that deals with this issue, the first report in that chapter is an opinion of Abu Huraira. It's not a prophetic hadith, it's an opinion of Abu Huraira. And a group of Muslims in Medina, this is after the death of the Prophet, a group of Muslims in Medina are debating whether or not there's more women or men in heaven. And Abu Huraira says, they come to him and they ask him what his opinion is. And he thinks and he says, there's more women in heaven. Why? Because the Prophet said that this group of people who enter heaven, each man will have 2 wives. Therefore, there's more women than men in heaven. Right? And then you see, wait, but there's other hadiths where the Prophet says, says that the women are the smallest number of people in heaven. Men are the greater number. And this is very interesting. What does a great scholar like Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani, who's a famous, probably the most famous kind of medieval hadith scholar, he's from Cairo.
Let's go back for a second. Here's the hadith. So, let's see. Oh, women folk, you should give charity and ask much forgiveness, for I saw you in bulk amongst the dwellers of hell. A wise lady asked, did I not already read that? Yeah, that's the hadith I already read. That he doesn't cite the whole thing. Okay, here is another dishonesty point right here. This is the hadith that I read about how, why are the majority of women in hell? Because they're lacking in intelligence and religion. Why? Because God made them that way. So do more charity and be more submissive to God and your husbands by extension, because, you're guilty. It's the concept of that sin and guilt, that they say there's no original sin in Islam except this. And this dishonest, lying apologist doesn't quote the rest of the hadith. He just says, oh, there are some hadiths about women being the majority in hell. How could that be? Read the rest of the hadith, you liar. Tell us, why is that the case? Ask your own prophet. Why are you trying to figure it out? Ask the own prophet. Oh. Let's continue.
In 1449, he says, this person narrating this hadith probably made a mistake.
Hold up. So the opinion of a scholar who died in, when was it?
He says, kind of medieval hadith scholar, he's from Cairo, he died in 1449.
He died in 1449. I'm assuming that's AD or whatever. So what year? That's like 600 years ago or 700 years ago. So not back then. All right.
He says, this person narrating this hadith probably made a mistake, because this person thinks that if there is more women in hell, there have to be less women in heaven. Whereas if women are the majority of mankind, Ibn Hajar says.
Hold up. So this scholar, right, however many hundred years later, says one of the Sahaba narrating the hadith made a mistake in their reasoning or in their narration. And we take these hadiths, we take them as something that we trust these trustworthy men, as they say. That's a reminder that they're just fallible men, and we don't even know what Muhammad or Allah meant because we're just relying on the words of men. And his interpretation is he misunderstood, because if women are the majority on earth, therefore they can be the majority in hell as well. What?
Women are the majority of mankind, Ibn Hajar says. If women are the majority of mankind, then even if you have exactly half of all men going to hell, and exactly half of all men going to heaven, and exactly half of all women going to hell, and exactly half of all women going to heaven, you still have more women in both heaven and hell. And so he says, this is my explanation for these hadiths.
But this guy, 700 years ago, didn't know that the difference between men and women in populations isn't that big. Not at all. They're almost a 50-50 split. Are they really trying to argue technicalities when Muhammad literally said, this is why you're the bulk in hell?
He's very flexible. And in fact, Muslim scholars were always very flexible when they were dealing with these issues, because they knew they were dealing with the realm of the unseen.
Of course they're very flexible, because the conclusion is fixed. The conclusion is that Islam is true. The conclusion is that nothing here is a problem. Let's try to bend it as if it's not a rib and make it work. For me, it was a rib, because when you try to bend it, it shatters. That's a fantastic analogy. Islam to me is like a rib. It's a bone. If you try to bend it, it will shatter. But for him, it's I guess it's a bone with not enough calcium. I don't know.
Afterlife, which none of us can ever possibly understand.
So because these things we cannot verify, that's the logic in Islam. Anything you cannot verify, which is all these huge claims, you have to be flexible and accept it.
That's why they would always use the famous saying of the companion Ibn Abbas, "Laysa fi dunya mimma fi al-akhirah illa al-asma." There's nothing in this world that's in the next world except names. The only thing we know in common is names. We can't possibly understand the details or the exact nature of the afterlife.
So you're selling me air. This is like people who sell timeshares, except they're overselling the timeshares and then telling you the timeshare is metaphysical and it's better than you even thought.
But why is this important? Because this is the kind of things that Muslims become obsessed with when they find these hadiths.
How dare Muslims question?
Oh, the Prophet, this is a misogynist hadith, this is a sexist hadith. No, it's not. Because the very people, not only the companions of the Prophet, but generations and generations of Muslim scholars after them, never thought this was saying that actually there are more women in hellfire than men.
Am I lying here, or did we just read the same hadith together?
They never interpreted like that. As I said, most of them actually believe that there are more women in heaven than men.
Let me remind you, right here.
What were they interested in? They were interested in the wisdom that the second part of all these hadiths, no one ever talks about the second parts of the hadiths. Right, where the Prophet says to the women he's talking to, he's trying to give them lessons to help them improve their lives.
Once you notice the abusive language here, the victim blaming language, it's always like this in Islam. No, women, this is for your own good. Muhammad meant to say something good by telling you that you're going to be the majority in hell. Let's hear what he's going to say. We read the same hadith together.
So he says, تُكْثِرْنَا اللَّعْنَ وَتُكْفِرْنَا الْعَشِيرَ.
Okay, I take it back. He does quote the hadith. So he's not dishonest in that sense, but let's see how he explains it.
You're women, you're cursing a lot, and you're being ungrateful to your husband. And he continues and he says, what is ungrateful? It means your husband is always good to you, but then one day he doesn't do something good for you, and you say to him, I've never seen anything good from you.
Again, the victim blaming. So all the women in this area, somehow, they're all such ungrateful wives, and therefore Muhammad he's threatening them with eternal hell, and it's for their own good, because they're such ungrateful women. Somehow, it's the fault of all the women in that region. For some reason, the women there are naggy and stuff. Don't you realize that this is just stereotyping women in general? Like, is the genetic makeup of the women there making them, is the heat of the desert making them more naggy? Is it that the men were actually more awful than usual? Because the bare minimum is what Islam says. You have to feed them and clothe them, and if they have to give up some of that right, then no pressure.
And this is a very interesting phrase. I think maybe people in the room have heard the phrase before, right? It's possible. It's very good advice the Prophet is giving these women.
I mean, do I need to do anything except play his video? This is great advice, he says.
So I'm saying be grateful when you have a good husband.
Where is this? Okay, so there's a lot of fear-mongering in Islam in general, right? The hell and forever torture, kiss God's behind and so on. Where is this kind of talking down to men? The only thing I see is, be fair to your women, treat them kindly, hit them lightly, not to the point that they would complain or that they would leave a mark or that you break a bone or break a tooth. Where's this like talking down to men? Don't be so assholish to your wives. Doesn't this sound like a men's club?
And then in other hadiths, he gives advice to men. And yet we still are obsessed with these. With
Where?
Our own, because of the worldview from which we come, we're obsessed with reading these hadiths through this kind of what sometimes people call a hermeneutic of suspicion.
So why is it that people are now focusing on these hadiths that are causing harm to women? Could it be because women are disadvantaged in those societies? Who gives a shit when God says, talks down to men, which he doesn't cite what examples, and says, hey, do better? Who cares? Because it's not used to infantilize men. It's not used to oppress them or beat them or behead them. Except, if it's disbelievers or some other group, that's a whole other topic. That's why, you genius, you person, how do these people have degrees? How did you sit through lectures and think and do assignments and you couldn't come up with this novel thought that the reason why people are focusing on this is because women are disadvantaged and it matters. The words matter more when the women are being punched down. It's that simple. But in the apologist's mind, that part of the mind is just dead. What does that verse say? Summun bukmun umyun fahum la yafqahun? Can't remember. They deaf, mute, and blind. And he was saying earlier that there are more women in heaven. Is it because the hur, like the heavenly maidens, count as women?
Because this person thinks that if there is more women in hell, there have to be less women in heaven. Whereas if women are the majority of mankind, then even if you have exactly half, you still have more women in both heaven and hell. None of us can ever possibly.
I don't remember what that part was, but let's let it go. Yeah. So that's the problem here is that this is hilarious. What a fantastic Arabic accent he has. MashaAllah, even better than yours. Highly doubt that, but I don't know how the accent is relevant if his comprehension is dog crap. Yeah, but people will try anything. Like they will forget about everything I said and focus on my accent, which I'm pretty sure is better than the majority of Muslims actually listening right now. Not to flex, but I don't understand how they pull this card of language when most of them don't even speak Arabic to begin with. All right, now I will show you a couple of hadiths. We are done with listening to this man. I'll show you a couple of hadiths. So here we go. 1 second. So you hear this narrative often that before Islam, people used to bury their daughters and things were just so bad, and Islam came and fixed everything up. Okay, so how come this is also simultaneously true? I'll have the source in the description, but it's It's talking about being fair to women and giving them mahr, right? And it says, let's see, العرب في الجاهلية كانت لا تعطي النساء من مهورهن شيئا. So in the days of Jahiliyyah, which is ignorance, is how it's labeled before Islam, Arabs didn't give their daughters or women mahr, the dowry, the only money that they would have. But simultaneously, don't forget that the Prophet's first wife was a merchant. She was rich. And they used to like take the money if the daughter was being married, they would take the money. So they would say to someone who has a daughter, "Hani'an laka nafija," like congratulations to you, because this girl, you're going to take her mahr, you're going to take the camels that you get as her dowry, and you're going to add them to yours, and you're going to be richer. So if that's the case, then why would they bury their daughters alive? If all they have to do is keep them alive for a few years, 6 or however many, marry them off to a guy who's going to pay them. If that's truly the case, they paint this opposition as an inhumane monster, right? Like the kuffar are the disbelievers they're bad to orphans, like in Surah Al-Ma'un. They're just awful people. They're misers. They're every description. And the people before Islam, they were just so backwards. They used to bury their daughters alive, as if they're not human, as if those people like en masse were all just like they hated women to the point that they would bury their own offspring. Even if they were sexist against women, even if they were okay with beating them, I cannot imagine that was just a thing. The sources are always Muslim sources claiming that. And simultaneously, they would congratulate each other for having a daughter because it's good money. How? And here's a point, I read this somewhere. So if you're listening to me and you're the one who wrote this comment, you know what? Credit goes to you. Someone had this thought, and I'm so glad people are out there having critical thoughts that I haven't had. This is exactly what I'm looking for. Yasir Qadi and so many other apologists would say, well, if Muhammad married a child, it was a bad thing. How come none of Quraysh called him out on it? How come, if it was such a bad thing, how come nobody called him out on it? And they were looking for anything to call him out on. And I had never thought of that angle before. If those people were burying their own daughters, do you think they would morally object to Muhammad marrying a child? So how is he using that, or any of those apologists using it, including Omar Suleiman, our favorite smiling, I don't want to keep using that word, PDF file apologist. If they were okay with burying daughters alive, humans, why would they criticize Muhammad for marrying a child, which in his worldview was old enough? It's crazy how they warp our minds from a young age to the point I didn't have that thought. I'm kind of almost ashamed that I didn't have that thought, but then again, I understand why. There's a lot of layers of indoctrination there that I had to overcome. So to whoever thought of that, kudos to you. All right, let me show you some hadith. So in this hadith, Aisha was beaten by Abu Bakr, the Sahabi Abu Bakr, and there's multiple sources for that. Let's read it real quick. Abu Bakr came towards me and struck me violently with his fist and said, "You have detained the people because of your necklace, but I remained motionless as if I was dead, lest I should awake Allah's messenger, although that hit was very painful." And here she uses the word lakaz wa wakaz. No, sorry. Let's see. They're saying it's the same, it's similar to the word laks or lakaza or wakaza. Those are the words used when Muhammad hit her on the chest. And then they say that wasn't a beating. Here she says very obviously it was painful. He beat me. And the scholars are interpreting it as the same word as when Muhammad didn't beat her. You see the lies? Don't trust any scholar of Islam. They're just all apologists, I would say. I mean, do your due diligence, is my opinion, because obviously they're all just full of it. Here is the next one. Abu Bakr slapped Aisha and Omar slapped Hafsa. All right, where is the relevant part? Let's see. Yeah. And Abu Bakr, may Allah be pleased with him. You see how much ass kissing they put in the same hadith about him slapping a woman? Abu Bakr, may Allah be pleased with him, then got up and went to Aisha and slapped her on the neck. They said not the face. I suppose technically that's not the face. And what humiliation is this for the Prophet? The Prophet was kind of a spineless man when you think about it. So his wives were out there, like Aisha was out there being slapped around. And Sauda, one time Omar said, Sauda was out there using the washroom, and Omar said, I can see you. And some narrations say that that's what kind of motivated the Prophet to finally tell his wives to cover up, or Allah to reveal it. But the disrespect, the humiliation, he couldn't even have a spine to tell people to leave his house and not linger. He had to get Allah to say it for him, this character. Allah saying, please don't linger in the Prophet's house. And here we see it. They're being disrespected and nothing. He slapped her on the neck, and Omar stood up before Hafsa and slapped her, saying, you ask Allah's messenger, which he does not possess. They said, by Allah, we do not ask Allah's messenger for anything he does not possess. You see how they're so abused that they're like, oh, no, we're sorry. And then he withdrew from them for a month or for 29 days. And then the verse was revealed to him, say to thy wives for a mighty reward. Okay, I didn't continue reading it. I didn't have time, but I don't care at the moment. Part of me thought, okay, let's read the context. And then I thought to myself, why the hell would the context matter? These men beat these two women right there. No context would justify that, especially when we're sold this narrative that Muhammad never beat anybody, but his friends would beat his wife. What the hell? There's a hadith here that I did not verify. Ibn Ishaq, page 496. I have not yet verified this myself, so I will not talk about it. There's a hadith that I showed earlier about Omar justifying beating his wife, justifying it using the Prophet's words. And this hadith I've quoted before shows you the Prophet's priorities. So Rif'a, a man called Rif'a, divorced his wife, whereupon Abdurrahman, blah, 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 married her. Aisha said that the lady came wearing a green veil and complained to her that her husband, and she showed her a green spot on her skin caused by beating. It was the habit of ladies to support each other. I don't know why that's relevant to mention. It was like she was siding with the woman because they're women, women be women. They're mentioning it as if it's a bad thing, but that aside, it was the habit of ladies to support each other. So when Muhammad came, Aisha said, I have not seen any women suffering as much as the believing women. Are we reading the same text? This is Aisha, his favorite person, the al-Mu'mineen, mother of the believers, just said women have been suffering more because of Islam. And we've seen in that other hadith earlier how the Prophet said, don't beat them. And then they started being bold, with their husbands. So the Prophet said, beat them. And then they started suffering more. Here it is, right? Like said plain and simple in Arabic and in English. So she said, look, her skin is greener than her clothes. And what irked me, very much so, this is under the book of dress, the chapter of green clothes. And I've read in Apologetics that the point of this hadith is that a woman is allowed to wear green clothes. And I've made noises that are so vulgar to make, they're in Arabic, and I can't do them right now. It's just like, what the hell? That's what the scholars took from this. And again, if it's not indicative of the religion itself, it's indicative of the mentality of the scholars ever since that time. And if Allah entrusted Islam with those people, then where is Allah's wisdom? If this is the preserved religion for hundreds of years, that people misunderstood this to mean the wisdom here is that a woman can wear green. Let's continue the hadith. So she complained, right? It doesn't say what the Prophet said or did. Seems like nothing. When Abdurrahman heard that his wife had gone to the Prophet, he came with his 2 sons from another wife. She said, by Allah, I have done no wrong to him, but he is impotent and is as useless to me as this, showing him the fringe of her garment. So he's a useless man. His pee-pee don't work, something like that. And Abdurrahman said, by Allah, blah, 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 she has told a lie. I am very strong and can satisfy her, but she is disobedient and wants to go back to her ex-husband, Rif'a. So let's understand the situation so far. She's saying he's impotent, and she wants to use that as a reason to divorce from him. And there's some context here, which is allegedly she is into her ex-husbands and she wants to go back with him, and therefore she could be lying that her husband is impotent, right? Or, he just isn't able to do it anymore. Whatever it may be, the fact that this is all linked to the beating is bizarre. He says she has told a lie. I'm very strong. I can, I sleep with women. I'm good at that. If that is your intention, then know that it is unlawful for you to remarry Rif'a unless Abdurrahman has sexual intercourse with you. So that's some weird, bizarre system in Islam, which I spoke about in a previous video by Shabir Ali on women. If a man divorces his wife with three times of saying I divorce you, it's final, and she has to sleep with the next husband to be able to be divorced and go back to the previous one. Otherwise, she's not allowed to. It's a bizarre, messed up system. If we want to talk about the rights of women, why is she the one who has to be violated? Let's go back to it. So Muhammad's saying, well, keep in mind, if you're lying and you just want to go back to your ex, which is not even an option for her to just call it off, like a man can call off the marriage at any point. She can't. She has to lie and say he can't have intercourse. Therefore, can I please legally separate from him? And he says, even if you do, you can't. You can't sleep. You can't sleep with your ex. You can't marry your ex unless you sleep with your current husband. Which brings up a point. What if the husband says no or doesn't want to or can't? But whatever. And so Muhammad said you would have to sleep with your husband. And then Muhammad saw the two boys with Abdurrahman and asked him, are these your two sons? And Abdurrahman said, yes. The Prophet said to the woman, you claim what you claim, that he's impotent, but by Allah, these two boys resemble him as a crow resembles a crow. Two things about that. First of all, why did he ask if they were his sons if he can see that they resemble him, if that's truly that obvious? And secondly, what the hell does that mean? The woman comes to complain that she was beaten. Let's revisit this. She comes to complain that she was beaten, and then she says, he can't have intercourse with me. I want a divorce. What if that's her reasoning to want to get away from this abusive marriage? And the Prophet focuses on, he's able to have intercourse with the other woman or his ex or whatever it may be. He's able to have children. Therefore, you're lying. Now go back to your husband who beats you green. That left a mark. Where's the whole beat her lightly thing? There's layers of lies here. And with each layer, they're disproving their own religion. Even if we concede the beating lightly part, she was beaten. There's nothing being said about, and this is a teaching moment. Don't beat your wife till it's green. No, the teaching moment is that a woman can wear green. What the hell? I'm so frustrated because I feel like I'm talking into, shouting into the wind. The fact that this is in plain English and plain Arabic, and I am the outsider here who has to hide his face because he's stating the obvious. It's bizarre, but I'm not the victim as much as the women are the victims here. And I feel bad for the women. I've spoken to women personally who justify this, who say, well, in some cases it's justified, or the woman is different from men. We are more emotional, but it's yet the men who are beating, the men who are starting wars, the men who are throwing their PlayStation controllers at their TV, who are waking the wife up in the middle of the night because they lost the video game. But somehow those poor women have convinced themselves that they're wrong because Allah says so. It's really frustrating. And yeah, one last thing before you go. This is the cherry on top. It just shows how obvious Jonathan Brown's his cognitive dissonance is. He had another video, a lecture about the whole 72 virgins topic, and he was deflecting. He was talking about, the number 72, that's a weak hadith. And he never talks about how the concept itself is the problem. But the audio is awful, and I'm so sick of that man at this point. But I want you to watch this video with me. It's a part of the video. It's not very long or anything. And then see if you can notice the cognitive dissonance, the very blatant cognitive dissonance here. If it works. Allah is working against me today.
And then I took a class on Islam for my second theology requirement. I just chose
Come on. You could do this.
that randomly, and that was it. I just
By Allah, shaitan is not helping me today.
And then I took a class on Islam for my second theology requirement. I just chose that.
Come on, man. Don't do this to me. You know what? Fine. I will make this work, because this is very important what he says here. It just highlights perfectly why people cannot be trusted. It's not happening today. Let me read a couple of comments in the meantime. So, to be honest, Apostate Aladdin, if that rule of only returning to the previous husband if she's first sleeps with someone else is only based on that one random hadith, then it's possible that this is just... Okay, still waiting. I'm not sure. Yeah, I have reduced the video's resolution, but it's still not working well. I don't know what it is. Idiotic rule made because Muhammad thought he was being very clever with a lie. No, I don't think that is the source of that rule, because of this one incident. There were other precedents. Let's see. You know what? I am so adamant on having this video that I'm just going to keep taking comments while I figure this out. I'll download it first. Okay, next comment. Yeah, Armin usually downloads. I did that for most of them, but this one I thought wasn't that necessary, so I will do that as we speak. Yeah, anyone else have anything to say? Let's see. Damn, Aladdin hasn't read any of my posts. There we go. I guess that counts, sort of. Okay, there we go. Now it should be working. So, in the meantime, let me just vamp. Yeah, sorry I've been frustrated today. I just don't know how to deal with this without frustration.
Dr. Brown, you were not born a Muslim. How did you become one?
Okay, so this is the video. Let me find that timestamp a second here.
But they don't want to in any way on these issues, and I was really eager to engage them. And so I actually went to Georgetown for undergraduate, and then I took a class on biblical literature. I'm still friends with the professor who taught it. He's now my colleague. And yeah, I guess that didn't really make me any more interested in being Christian. And then I took a class on Islam for my second theology requirement. I just chose that randomly, and that was it. I just was so interested.
So he chose that class randomly.
Just this seemed to me to be the religion that I had always believed in, and that was it.
So it seemed to have some things that the religion of your youth was lacking, something that would soothe that existential angst that you were referring to.
I mean, I don't really, it's kind of hard to tell, because it's like someone saying, you were raised your whole life eating bad chili or something, and then you went to a really good Chinese restaurant. You're like, oh, Chinese food is what I want to eat for the rest of my life. Well, I mean, yeah, but you could also have liked good chili if you hadn't been eating bad chili. So, I mean, I think that's a weird analogy, but I mean, I think that it's hard for me to say this because I am Muslim and I believe my religion is the true faith, but I recognize that it was simply a matter of contingency or luck or whatever fate that I didn't find that nourishment in my own tradition, because I think had I been around different people or different influences, that would have been very easy. I think I easily could have found the same soothing or the same answers that I found as a Muslim.
You notice what he just said? So he chose Islam randomly, like his Islam lecture randomly. And that's what led him to adopting Islam at some point. And he was saying, had I come across this, like the answers that would have soothed my curiosity, or my existential, well, the other person put it as like existential, I don't know, angst or whatever it is, that gap that you had to fill. He said, if I had found it somewhere else, I would have been that other religion. And he said it himself. This is hard for me to admit because I'm a Muslim. I think there's a continuation to this.
Mm-hmm.
Excuse me.
So speaking of things that you have affinities to, I noticed in your book, Misquoting Muhammad, that there was a lot of interesting information about recent Islamic thinkers in Egypt.
Okay, yeah, I don't remember if this is relevant, but the point is he recognizes that had luck been differently, I think he said luck or fate.
Matter of contingency or luck or whatever fate that
Luck or fate? How do those people not realize it right in front of their face? So he got lucky by coming across Islam, and had he been unlucky by coming across these concepts in another religion, in another environment, he would have stuck to that. That's exactly what I'm saying is at the core of this nonsensical test of life. He recognizes it, yet at the same time he knows it's difficult to reconcile, and then he just pushes it aside. I guess it's, just as easy as what he does with all the apologetics about the wife beating. So he got lucky. And what does fate have to do with this? So God pre-wrote that this is going to be his fate, that he's going to come across Islam. What about the people who this wasn't their fate? You see how this like gaping hole in their rationality is filled with indoctrination right there. I don't know how he got to that point, given that he wasn't born a Muslim. I don't know. I'm more familiar with how it goes from birth. Interesting. Okay, so someone brought my attention to a verse that I had forgotten about this verse. I'm not sure, Asbab al-Nuzul, whether it was revealed before or after this incident of Sauda giving up her night for Aisha, but this verse kind of legitimizes it. It says, إن امرأة خافت من بعلها نشوزا. So if a woman fears from her husband contempt or evasion, it uses the word nushuz right here. So nushuz is not, as they say, cheating or like backstabbing or literal violence or all the stuff that they put in these extreme cases. It's just contempt or evasion. If you fear her contempt, you can beat her. If you fear her disobedience. So if she fears his evasion, there is no sin upon them if they make terms of settlement between them. If she's worried he's going to leave her, then they settle. She begs him, basically. And settlement is best. And present in souls is stingness. I don't know what the hell that means. Okay. But if you do good and fear Allah, then indeed Allah is ever with what you do acquainted. So this either, I don't know if this was revealed before. I think this was revealed after what Sauda did. Muhammad was like, this is a fantastic idea. You know what? Write that down. Write that down. Jamie, pull that up. Pull that up. That's now a verse. And now he legitimized it as in if the wife is scared of her husband leaving her, if she feels like she's lacking beauty compared to the new wife, give up something so he doesn't divorce you and you're not on the street on your butt with nobody to marry you. So this is women's rights in Islam, everybody. I think this is a great place to wrap up. And I just want to reiterate, I know that Muslims are better than Islam. I know that thankfully, if all Muslims were strictly following Islam, if they were good Muslims in that sense, like good as in obedient to Allah in every way, we'd be in trouble. Just like if all Christians followed everything in Christianity and so on. So I think they are better than that, especially when they're not following that well. But the problem is there's this tribalism, this sense of us versus them, the sense of the enemy is out to get Islam, the enemy of Islam is out to get us, the enemy of Allah. And even the non-practicing Muslims, even the ones who aren't aware of any of this, who haven't done the digging for themselves in the apologetics, they will be viciously against someone like me calling this out. And I understand where that's stemming from. I just hope that they focus their energy and attention on helping the victims, on getting to these issues at their core, on removing them from their books. But how do you remove this from the Quran? I don't even know. I don't even know. I really don't have an answer for that. So I think I'm doing my part by calling it out. I'm doing my part by giving legitimacy to these complaints. I'm going to have another call-in live stream where I have women call in and talk, whether they are Muslim or ex-Muslim women, talk about their experiences with this, about how it's not just about bad culture or a bad parent or things like that. Even in my previous live stream, there was a Muslim woman who called in and she told me about her, not necessarily doubts, but her objections to a lot of these things. And somehow she's still able to, or she's trying to make sense of them within the framework of Islam. And I don't blame her for that. But at least she's honest about those things. She's honest with herself about how this shouldn't fly. I shouldn't be beaten lightly or not lightly, whatever any of these apologetics are. So I'm happy to see that. And I'm always happy to hear from Muslims who do see reason in this. So yeah, I guess there can be positive out of this, but just please think about what you're reading. Think about what you're told by these apologists who are lying to your face, straight up lying to your face, as we just saw. The guy who claims that 3 people were beheaded in the last year in his neighborhood, the most violent neighborhood in all of North America or wherever he is. Absolute lies. So, think, I want to say think critically and think for yourself. But I thought I would take a couple of comments first because I haven't been paying attention to the comments, and then I'm going to end it there. So thank you. Nesogaster says, hey, Aladdin, thanks for the awesome stream. I know it's an uncomfortable topic to delve super deep into. I learned a bit today. I'm glad you did. Yeah, I need a long break after this. Muslims are people just like us. I have Muslim friends who keep their faith to themselves. When it comes to stressful situations, they avoid but never justified their faith or ill teachings. I'm always happy to see that. And I recognize the conflict that some Muslims have. I've been through it myself. And that's why I don't go in real life and pester Muslims about this. The people who do come and interact with my videos, they chose to be here. They might come across a thumbnail, but they can, turn it down, press not interested. So I'm not doing this to antagonize anybody, but we do need the space to talk about this. And if someone feels like they're in that position of questioning, or as others have put it, they find this to be a space where they can have these discussions, then they're more than welcome. But I don't want to disturb the people who are somehow making sense of it while not being harmful or violent. Then, keep doing what you're doing. Robert, hey, Robert, from the last stream. Will you do a live stream on Shabir Ali's new concubinage series? Is it even done? I don't know. I saw one pop up today where Shabir Ali is talking about concubines. I didn't watch it. I don't know. I'm kind of bored of Shabir Ali at this point. It's just low-hanging fruit. The guy doesn't back up any of his points with anything. It's just boring at this point. And I hope that enough videos of mine, demonstrate the vagueness and emptiness of his material. So I don't think so. I've got a lot I'm working on, including a new project, which I hope you all tune in for. My next video, hopefully, I will announce it soon, will be, it's about a miracle. And it's not about the scientific miracles. It's not about any of that stuff. It's an Islamic miracle and also other with an asterisk. So I'm just going to leave it there. And I'm going to premiere the video. I'm going to have a trailer for the video that tells you what it's about. You can watch that once I put it up. Then I'm going to premiere it where you get to watch it with me, and you're going to be in the comments just like now. I will be in the comments. I won't be on the screen live. The video will be. And then once it's done, we would go to a live stream where you can ask me in the comments or call in, and not ask me necessarily, but comment on the video. Argue if you want to, as in like disagree with something. If you'd like to give me your thoughts, ask more questions. That way it will be more interactive. And I hope that sequence of events, will work out. So stay tuned for that. Are you next in line to debate Ali Dawah? No. I've never done the debate thing. And if I were to ever debate someone, it would have to be a worthy topic. Like, what are we even trying to debate here? Is Islam true? I don't care to debate that kind of thing because it has to be proven first. And it wouldn't be Ali Dawah, because all I'd need to do is just stand there and watch him make a fool out of himself. And I don't think he would do well in front of my sass. And I remember there was this YouTuber who's like obsessed with me at this point, and he heard me say I'm going to exercise my sass to roast him, and he said that's a gay word. This is evidence that Apostate Aladdin is gay. So I just keep saying the word sass now. Do not waste your time with so-called debates. I agree. Let's see. Zagro says, I strongly disagree with you there, Aladdin. I think I got some strong arguments as to why people shouldn't delude themselves with their own interpretation and accept consensus. See, here's the thing. I just think that I cannot do everything. And if I start to try to change everybody, it's never going to work. I think that as long as people find some kind of equilibrium, like even if they're deluding themselves, not everyone has the luxury of time and energy people sometimes have stuff going on in their lives. They don't have even the time to look into this, the money. Maybe they don't have access to internet, the unfettered access, because people are watching them and they get in trouble if they start asking too many questions. Whatever it may be, there are situations where the person's not, too harmful to themselves or others. They genuinely believe Muhammad was a great man and he never said hit women, and they're not going to hit women. You know what? You do you. I can't change everybody's mind, and that's not what I'm setting out to do. But if someone is trying to paint this beautiful image of Muhammad while, preaching Islam, that's when I say, wait a second, because people don't know what they're signing up for. And also you're erasing history. And also you're silencing the voices of people suffering today. That's what I care more about. And the ex-Muslims who are meant to, made to feel crazy for this. Sister X says, thank you for bringing so many things to light, Apostate Aladdin. We appreciate all of your work immensely. Thank you. I appreciate the compliments and the and the encouragement. It really does help. Don't be sorry. It's very frustrating. Yeah, it is. I think you might agree with me if you heard my arguments. Yeah, we are due to talk at some point. So looking forward to that. Maybe you'll get to explain your point of view to me then. Let's see. I don't talk. Okay, let me just put this out there. Ali Dawah is, just to put it lightly, despicable and pathetic. And I don't say this because he's promoting Islam. Like, I didn't call Jonathan Brown, the guy who blocked me, despicable and pathetic. I call him a liar because he is, or he seems to be. But Ali is more despicable and pathetic because he acts like a child, and all of his following are just childish. Like, people have been asking me, what do you think of that debate? I didn't even watch it because of how he sounds. That guy, his voice, his shrill voice, and his dumb repetition of insults is just listen to how I talk and listen how he talks. Listen to how any ex-Muslim content creator talks in general, and listen to how he talks. He says nothing. He's just repeating, just crying all the time. He was obsessed with Infidel Noodle, for example, made 16 TikToks about her without ever addressing anything that she spoke about, about women. He's such a pathetic, sad man that's his whole relevance. I mean, I get that told to me all the time, but I know my value. I know that I'm actually trying to do something here. I know that if I shut down my camera and leave forever, I've done something valuable. I still have value outside of this. His whole brand is just shouting at people and saying he's proud of Sharia executing apostates, and he would have that, he'd be all for it if that was the law of the land. I don't respect that kind of person. I look down on him. He is so pathetic to me. So when people ask me, like, are you going to debate him? I'm like, about what? What is there to debate here? Why I shouldn't be executed? Like, he's never made a case for anything eloquently enough to be debated to begin with. So I just wanted to air my thoughts on that guy because it frustrates me to see. I was talking earlier about this whole like hush hush culture in Islam of you should advise him quietly. Don't make this a scandal because he's our brother, because haram, it's backbiting, all that stuff. I hate that because then people are pressured into conforming, into just being complacent about that kind of thing. There are Muslims who want to call him out, but then they feel like it's haram to talk so publicly about a brother who means well, that kind of thing. And what's funny is that guy, his whole charade, his whole insults of AP in that one debate or so-called debate, he justified it by saying, I can't remember if it was Abu Bakr or someone else, one of the Sahaba, he told a polytheist to go suck on his goddesses, down there. And it was justification that, yeah, you can talk rude to people who are enemies of Islam and so on. He has justification from Islam, and that's the problem. There's so much justification for anything in Islam, like one side or the other. And what's funny is, like, there were supporters of him saying, yeah, he's right. There is precedent for this. You should be acting like a child because that other person is not worth your time. So can I really blame that kind of person? Yeah, I mean, this is what I think. And I know this is off topic. I'm sorry to be tainting this stream, with an important topic about this, but I just need to air it out. And he's not worth a video about this. In a sense, I feel sorry for him because he's this simplistic, like very simple person who was molded into what he is today, in a sense. He's so gullible and simple, and maybe he has a lot of deficiencies that make him unlikable. So he clings on to this sense of identity, to this sense of bigger meaning, and he exercises his childish behavior, and he sees it working, so he keeps doing it again. And I normally wouldn't talk down to someone and be like, "Oh, they're so stupid," but this person is causing real world harm, so I don't mind saying and belittling him and saying this is a stupid person who, to some extent, I feel like isn't even in control of his pathetic behavior. Like, this is what happens when dogma preys on vulnerable, dumb people. But it doesn't just become that they're victims. They cause others to be victims. They cause more harm. They train. The amount of teenagers and older and younger on a lot of apps who are just so zealous, who take this sentiment that he feeds them and they echo it on and on and on again. I've dealt with this enough. Every single day, people repeat the things that he say and worse. Where is all that coming from? Like, this, it's not just that we should feel sorry for him. Someone has to do something about it. And by someone, I mean Muslims should call him out. They shouldn't feel this shame that the Prophet said, do it in private. No, publicly say, this is not us. We want nothing to do with this. This is pathetic. So I'm glad that some Muslims have been doing that already. It's embarrassing. He deleted like 200 plus comments, it seems, from his video. Like, very obviously, people actually took screenshots of that. And I just don't understand how these people can gain traction and keep going the way that they do. Like, part of me can't even, I don't want to start naming people, but other apologists that I've spoken to, or Dawah people or whatever, to varying degrees of knowledge, they have platforms that are stupidly huge. Like, one of them, 500,000 followers, I believe, or maybe it was 300 on some other app. How does a person so vulgar and uneducated and short-sighted get to that big of a following? How am I struggling to reach people's minds, yet he has unfettered access? What else is it but the religion, or religion in general? It's this Trojan horse. You can fill it with something and then sneak it in. And I don't think that all of these men are doing it because they're evil, or because they think they're, I'm going to use this religion to put my ideas in. They truly, they think they're doing the right thing. And that's what breaks my heart, is I can't even hate them per se. But they get to a point like Ali Dawah where, yeah, that person is despicable. We just need to call it as it is. That person is absolutely despicable. And the fact that he has a platform, not just that he hasn't been canceled by some platform, that he hasn't been canceled by his own people. He hasn't been shamed and put aside by his own people so far is sad. So that's how I feel about Ali Dawah. I don't have that much of a favorable opinion of a lot of the other apologists, but he's like really, really down there. Yeah, I don't have a grape opinion of him. I had to put a pun in there. Thank you, Music Guy. I really appreciate this. Give it up for our mods, people. Music Guy and Amber, I really appreciate you guys being here. My cats appreciate it for the catnip as well. Yeah, so those are my thoughts on Ali Dawah. Do you have any questions before I close this topic for a while? I'm curious. What you guys? Yeah, that was a weird drama. So I saw that Sajid stood up against Ali Dawah's stupidity. I don't even watch Sajid's stuff, to be honest, but I saw that clip. There was a little clip. I wonder if I can find it while I vamp here, of a Muslim saying publicly, like in one of those speaker's corner type things, that they're against Ali Dawah. And yeah, I found the video. I want to show you how low the bar is, that some people were impressed, and I don't blame them. Like, some people where this was posted were like, oh, at least he said this. Let's look at it together, and I'll tell you my commentary. Let me just prepare the video. Let me see the comments here. Is there anything in the comments? Talk with Pine Creek. Who is Pine Creek? Can you give me a little overview of who that person is? There we go. Yeah, so this video was posted somewhere, and I found interesting is how like the good perspective from that Muslim was still pretty horrid. Come on. I think Allah's working against me today. Or my computer's just not up to par. One more thing not to regret. Okay, one more thing not do not regret losing your cool. Do be soft, stand up where necessary. Sometimes I lose my cool and it's justified. I have to admit to that, yeah. And sometimes I feel bad about it because I feel like they use the smallest slip up to vilify us. I've never lost my cool and said, Muslims are so and so, but it was more like, yeah, I lose my cool about anything, and they say, look at how ex-Muslims are so emotional, when religion has always been about emotions. Has that ever crossed your mind, how that line, have you left Islam for emotional reasons? You're in Islam for emotional reasons. Faith is all about emotion, and that applies to other religions as well. I'm downloading the video so we get to finally watch it because, yeah, the StreamYard gods are against me today. Someone's saying Myth Vision's Derek is cool. Yeah, I do like Derek, and I did have a stream with him. I want to have more someday, but I don't have that much to add to his type of content, to be honest. All right, here's the video.
A fan of it.
So yeah, this is the part where Sajid talks about Ali Dawah, but this is the one that I'm interested in. So this was another condemnation. Okay, let's listen to this.
Apostate prophet. He's a khabith, dirty, disgusting guy. You know who knows apostate prophet? He's a khabith, dirty, disgusting guy. You know him, eh? Someone called apostate prophet. He's an evil, disgusting, dirty guy, yeah?
Okay, Apostle Prophet, he's a khabith. I don't know how to translate khabith one for one, but it's, yeah, like an evil, disgusting, dirty person.
But, brother, when you want to refute debate, especially if openly, for the whole world, there's a way to do it. He is Adu al-Rahman, which he is, la khabith.
Adu al-Rahman, khabith. This is the stereotype of angry Arab Muslim man. Why are you doing that? This doesn't look good for any of us. He is the enemy of Ar-Rahman, God. And Ar-Rahman means the merciful, which is so ironic when people use the word merciful to describe Allah. He's the enemy of Allah, but...
May Allah deal with him, May Allah guide him or break his back,
May Allah guide him or break his back?
Is la khabith. May Allah deal with him, May Allah guide him or break his back.
Either or.
And burn his tongue. That's why I make dua as al-kadab al-khabith. However,
the lying, all that stuff.
You do open debate, thousands of people watching it, not knowing the hikmah. And there's many debates when I've done with some people, even the enemies, you have to use hikmah. Not because you respect him. No. He's a khabith, Adu al-Rahman. Because you're going to utilize him to show the people, look how foolish these guys believe, but in a good way. Akhi, that guy's khabith. And the other brother is my Muslim brother. That guy's Dajjal. Because they always say, he's a good kuffar. No. But akhi, it was...
He had to put so many disclaimers. It's not that I'm defending AP. He's a khabith. He's a this, he's a that. He's insulted him, 20 times before he could give his little piece of wisdom, which is, but you got to put on a good front for people. Like, this is for the benefit of everyone watching. And he does have a point. You don't have to respect the other person. And you think I respect the people who are belligerent towards me when I'm being, kind of civil with them? No, not necessarily. But he had to insult him 20 plus times to get that point in, which is, but still be civil.
Embarrassment. He said do mubahala, then he said I tricked you because you're kafir. But the worst thing, he's a kafir, and he said I don't care, I will do mubahala. To show you that that's what he's doing. Wal-iyadu billah, he's mocking Allah. That's why the angle is coming from this khabith. Because he knows to mock Allah and his messenger. And you tell him to mubahala? Look how he's mocking, he's doing like this.
Anyway, you get the idea here. And again, what's funny is he has precedent for not only his insults for AP, because anyone who criticizes Islam and is an enemy of Islam and deserves all that stuff, and especially someone who mocks Islam all the time, not only he has precedent for that, Ali Dawah has precedent for his behavior. So both of them have precedent in Islam. Yeah, may Allah break his back. And I don't understand what this prayer. So may Allah either guide him or break his back. Okay, I understand the guide him part, but do you think Allah's gonna Allah's being insulted and offended and all that stuff, and then he's like, oh, this person prayed that I break his back. I should do something right now. It's funny stuff. Anyway, I had to end it on a funny note just to get some of this steam off. Thank you everyone for attending today. I appreciate you being here. Oh, PSF, thank you. I haven't seen you around in a while. His mentality is just as bad as Ali Dawah in a sense. Anyhow, yeah, thanks everybody for tuning in. I urge you to please listen to the things that you receive from scholars or otherwise do your own research as well. And if you have enough reason to distrust the person, if they've lied to you so many times to your face, like Jonathan Brown, then please distrust them. I will talk about Jonathan's justifications of slavery as well. I don't think I'm going to read his book. It's too much effort. I have other books on my mind right now. But everybody keeps saying Jonathan Brown, Jonathan Brown. So now we've dealt with the whole women's thing, hopefully. I don't think we need to discuss the Aisha thing. I've already taken it from Omar Suleiman and other people. So next is going to be slavery at some point in the future. But I'm probably going to focus on a bunch of other live stream formats. Like I have a bunch of ideas here. For example, I want to have a stream called Teach Me. So I had one called Correct Me, where I present an idea. I present my interpretation, which I think is the mainstream interpretation. And I say, why do you believe otherwise? Change my mind, kind of, but not in a debating way. More like present, like here's your chance to put on a case for your interpretation. So I have that for like Correct Me, but I want Teach Me. So I'm going to talk to not Muslims in that case. It would be Christians. If you're here in the comments, keep that in mind. You would come in and tell me, like, explain to me either specific concepts or Christianity in general. We'll figure that out, and other religions as well, because I am kind of like a blank canvas to you. I don't know that much about your religion, and that was kind of intentional because, I'll just wait and see what you tell me. So that would be Teach Me kind of stream. I also want to do more call-ins with, again, the why do you believe with believers, more call-ins with ex-Muslims who want to either vent or talk about a specific topic. Maybe some Q&A, but as a call-in format. Maybe sometimes I'll try to take some private messages or I will post something and let people put in comments to be read in a live stream if they cannot call themselves and they want to still contribute or have something they said, be read. Yeah, what else? And I'm thinking about doing short videos. So I have a lot of ideas that haven't been yet refined to the point of making it a 20-minute video, and there isn't enough time for that. So I'm thinking about just putting snippets out there of more like, here's an initial idea for you to investigate, right? Think about this contradictory concept. Like, for example, here's just a very simple example that came to mind. If Aisha was an adult woman, right, or in the sanity of mind at the age of 6 or 7 to decide whether she would marry the Prophet or not, or to consent, or even at the age of 9 to consent, how come there are hadiths about separating the boy and the girl brothers in bed at around the age of 7 and then beating them at the age of 11? Or was it the other way around? I can't remember, but there's a hadith like that. Or would here's the question that really puzzled me. Would Aisha have been, or someone like her in that situation, would she be stoned for adultery if a 9-year-old girl or a 10-year-old girl was lured into zina with a man and there were witnesses and all the weird conditions and whatever, or she confessed to it? Because how impressionable is a child? They will confess to that kind of thing. Would she be culpable to the point of being stoned to death? Because that's a contradiction here. We say that she's an adult, but can you really imagine that visual? So that's a gory topic, but an ugly one. But I have other thoughts that are kind of like, here's a contradiction, do your research about that. So I'm thinking about doing those kind of shorts. Yeah, that's about it. Thank you everyone again for the comments and for being here. I cannot believe Ali Dawah has 696,000 subs. And here I am, hopefully making more of a meaningful contribution than all of the shouting that he does to his 700,000 viewers plus. That's incredible. Yeah. Take care, everybody. And as always, please think critically and think for yourself. Bye-bye.